listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows, where Elvis is on the show tonight. That's right, we found him living on the dark side of the moon. Actually, we found him running a baguette shop in Hawick in the Scottish borders. He's unbelievable. And we'll be talking to 1970s Manchester City Messi star, I mean real Lionel Messi type player, Barry Silkman, who struggled to earn £100 a week in his football days, but now negotiates salaries of £100,000 a week for his clients as a football agent. We'll be talking to him about what else but the European Super League. We'll be talking about the United States of America. What a mess it's in. I saw a picture earlier today from San Francisco that looked like a straight shot from the Dust Bowl of the Depression of the 1930s. We'll be talking, of course, about coronavirus as India suffers 1 million sick people in 3 days this week. We'll be talking, of course, about Scottish nationalism and me, and we'll be talking about anything you want to talk about when you call up the show. So please do. This, I promise you, is rock and roll radio with pictures. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway.
This is Radio Sputnik.
And this is London, but coming to you, of course, all over the world, thanks to the wonders of the internet invented by Al Gore, and, of course, courtesy of SputnikNews.com. We are on FM in the Washington, D.C. area of the United States. Donald Trump's no longer there to listen and watch us, but maybe Joe Biden, if he knows what day it is, will tune in one day. That's 105.5 if you're in D.C. You can listen on AM right across the United States from Burning City to Burning City, coast to coast. And you can listen, of course, all over the world, thanks to the aforementioned SputnikNews.com. But if you are one of the 500,000 people or more who watch as well as listen to the show, then listen up. If you are watching on Facebook, then please share it right now with all your friends and contacts. You can watch on my Facebook page, on RT's multiple Facebook pages, ditto on YouTube, except YouTube are now in dispute with RT, so you'll have to watch it on my YouTube channel. George Galloway, do subscribe when you visit it, please. You can watch on Twitter, as an ever-increasing number of people are. You can even watch on Instagram, and you can watch on Twitch, and you can watch on my Telegram channel, which is t.me/George Galloway. But however you are consuming this truly global current affairs show with an audience that knocks every other show of its type into a cocked hat, I think you're going to enjoy it tonight. We'll be touring the world from India to the United States. We'll be talking about football, talking about the Oscars, which starts in Los Angeles in just a few hours from now. We'll be talking about the fiasco of the European Super League with a man who knows that money is murdering football, even if it's his job to get as much of it as possible for the footballers. Well, why should they be left out? But first up, the Scottish nationalist who threatened to shoot me in the head publicly under his own name on Twitter, untrammeled. He wasn't banned. He's still not banned from Twitter. Appeared in court on Friday and pled guilty to threatening to murder me on Twitter. But he was released on bail without a tag, and so I've got no idea if he'll be waiting for me on my front doorstep when I get home. He was allowed out on bail pending reports. Although what reports you need when somebody pleads guilty to having threatened to murder a prominent political figure in the middle of an election campaign, I'm not sure what you'd have to do to get the jail in Nicola Sturgeon's SNP Scotland. The threats were, of course, not just against me. He threatened to murder the leader of the Conservative Party in Scotland with the same gun. He's a 63-year-old former soldier who presumably knows one end of a gun from another. I also learned today he similarly threatened to murder Lord Forsyth, who, as Michael Forsyth, was once the Secretary of State for Scotland and a parliamentary opponent for many years of mine. So there's 3 prominent politicians that this man threatened to murder, all with shots to the head, but he's out on bail, awaiting reports. I suppose we ought to be grateful that he was prosecuted at all, because there ain't much justice in Nicola Sturgeon's Scotland, as Alex Salmond found to his cost, as the Rangers administrators found, not to their cost in the end, but to ours, because we're paying them almost £100 million in compensation for false and malicious prosecution. Their words, the prosecutor's words, not mine. That's right. The prosecutors admit that they maliciously prosecuted individuals who are now having to be lavishly, handsomely compensated from the taxpayer. I'm in the middle of that election campaign when you might have expected that in a normal, civilized society, all protections would have been offered to legitimate candidates running in that election, but not so. Now, the election took a particularly ugly turn this week when the First Minister of Scotland warned English visitors to Scotland not to enter our cafes, restaurants, or bars. If she had used any other nomenclature other than English, she would have had to be arrested, not least under the hate crime law that her own government introduced. If she'd said black people visiting Scotland may not enter our cafes, bars, or restaurants, because, you know, dirty might spread disease, she would have had to be arrested. If she'd said Jewish visitors to Scotland, or Muslim visitors to Scotland, or gay visitors to Scotland, or trans visitors to Scotland, or Irish visitors to Scotland, she would have had to have been arrested. But of course, refugees are welcome in Scotland, but English people are not. And as a friend of mine from The Majority, great Twitter feed, if you haven't followed it yet, pointed out, you can no more have civic nationalism than you can have civic racism. Nationalism is nationalism. Scorpions sting because they are scorpions. Nationalists hate other nationalism because they are nationalists. And I'm afraid that's where we are in Scotland today. But the wheels are coming off the nationalist bandwagon, and I like to think I've played some part in that. The fiscal authorities, experts, reported today on the front page of the Sunday Times that Scotland has now moved to a budget deficit 8 times the budget deficit that they would be allowed to run if they, as they wish, were to seek entry into the European Union. 8 times. That means that if Scotland were to be allowed, a highly problematic proposition, I can assure you, given that Spain has a veto, they would have to essentially completely end public spending in Scotland in order to reduce a budget deficit that is 8 times higher than it would be allowed to be. And given that only half of the people in Scotland work and pay tax, and half of those work in taxpayer-funded jobs, in the NHS, in local authorities, in government, for the Ministry of Defence and so on, this ending of public spending in Scotland and the complete failure, inability to meet welfare and pension obligations would effectively mean that Scotland would be a ruin. And if that doesn't put you off voting for the SNP, nothing will. Talking of countries in ruin, who can be unmoved by the epic biblical scenes appearing on our screens from India? 1 million people got the coronavirus in 3 days last week. That's the coronavirus that some people continue to insist was a hoax. It was a Bill Gates hoax. It doesn't exist. It's just the flu. Nobody really died of it. They died of something else that they would have died of otherwise. COVIDiots, I call them. Well, just look at India and ponder the Grim Reaper now cutting a massive swathe through the world's second most populous nation. Now, I don't want to add in any way to the grief of the people of India. Far from it. I was one of the first to highlight here on this show the mounting anxiety that I felt about the handling of this coronavirus in India and the ability of the Indian political and social structures to handle it. But I'm bound to make this point. China became socialist in the same year almost that India became an independent capitalist country. Compare and contrast the handling of the coronavirus in China with the handling of the coronavirus in India. If that doesn't make you sit up and take notice, then you are deliberately averting your eyes. The success of China in not just vanquishing coronavirus in record quick time with record low casualties, but the bounce back of the Chinese economy, practically the only economy in the whole world still growing and growing fast. It makes you wonder, doesn't it, why so much effort in the world, in the media, amongst politicians, goes into trying to tarnish and, if possible, weaken, if not stop, the rise of China in the world. I mention it because only this week, British parliamentarians who know a thing or two about genocide decided to label the world's biggest hoax, the hoax of the so-called genocide of Uyghur Muslims. The only genocide in history without dead people. Who's been killed in this genocide? Where? When? How? It is even more than the hoax over the WMD in Iraq. Possibly the biggest lie in history. A genocide with no dead people. A genocide which is in fact a struggle by the Chinese government to defeat ISIS and Al-Qaeda, otherwise known in China as the East Turkmenistan Islamic Liberation Organization. a fight that ought to have the support of all right-thinking people. How so then, in which my wife has an interest, have already dealt with this matter in a short. Look it up if you haven't seen it yet. But I cannot allow this moment of juxtaposition of India with China, the two most populous countries in the world. One of them a rip-roaring success on virtually every metric, and one of them in such agony that I say right now the whole world should be moving heaven and earth to India to get this raging pandemic under control. Oxygen, ventilators, medicine, PPE, personnel, money. Everyone should be moving heaven and earth to save India from this perdition into which it has plunged. We'll be talking also about the United States. I saw a picture today, I retweeted it, from my good friend Garland Nixon. A picture from San Francisco. Someone my age has a vision of San Francisco. If you're going to San Francisco, be sure to wear some flowers in your hair. The summer of love in the 1960s, the hippies, is now such a basket case that one would require an armed guard to go out for a walk in its once beautiful streets that once I trod myself as a guest, as it happens, of Sean Penn, the writer and director, and of course, epic film star. Tonight we'll be talking about the Oscars. It's a long time since I went to the cinema. It's a long time since you went to the cinema, but it's one of the things I'm most looking forward to doing, not least to the premiere of my own film, Killing Kelly, which will be out just as quickly as we can get into a cinema for the premiere. The Oscars are, of course, important. Film is important, but it's not as important as football. Football, which we invented here on this island and exported to the entire world. Half of the people in the world have an allegiance to one of the 6 English clubs, the 2 Spanish clubs, and the Italian clubs that got together, having lied about their intentions throughout, to sneakily prepare to abandon ship and create a so-called European Super League. Suddenly, when this bombshell burst at the weekend, the fighting talk from working class people all over the globe made me proud to stand with them. I heard on television more references to the words working class than I've heard in the last 30 years in Britain. I heard more talk about the unacceptable face of capitalism, how capitalism equaled greed, how greed was no longer good, if it ever had been. In the movie Wall Street, greed is good, says Michael Douglas. It wasn't true then, and it sure isn't true now. The massive upsurge of rejection of the worship of money and the slaying of the sacred cow of competitive football was something to behold. So much so that the Super League was swept away in just 48 hours. 48 hours after its announcement, it was dead. And they say there's no such thing as people power. Well, they know now. The people, united, can never be defeated. It's one of the reasons why this show, which is a people's show, has become a worldwide phenomenon. And I'm glad that you're with me for the next 2 hours and 40 minutes of the mother of all talk shows.
Radio Sputnik.
You know, and it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary McLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
That was the voice of the inimitable imitator, Lewis MacLeod, of course. And we'll be talking more about impersonations later when we meet Elvis. But talking of the United States of America, Anton Chaitkin is an author and historian. He has a new book, Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress from Franklin to Kennedy. The first volume, 1750s to 1850s, fundamentally overturns much of what is taught as American history. It's the inside story of how America became the most powerful manufacturing nation in the world. And I'm glad to say, Anton Chaitkin, the author, joins me now. Welcome to the show, Anton. I won't lie, I haven't yet had the chance to read your book, so kindly summarize what the first volume will teach us.
Thanks, George. The first volume is a history of the industrialization of both England and the United States. And using archival sources, it ruins the legitimacy of the present globalized system. It shows that the United States was developed into a major power, into a manufacturing country by idealistic strategists who had to fight for making the new industries, the railroads and the canals and the coal mining and the iron industry. They had to fight against the imperialists in London and New York and against the slave owners who viciously opposed the industrialization of the country. So this is it completely undercuts the present establishment, the Anglo-American establishment that changed this system after the murder of Kennedy and brought us a contrary philosophy and contrary system with cheap labor and perpetual war.
Do you see the murder of Kennedy, which affected me greatly and still does? I just listened again the other night to Bob Dylan's epic on the murder most foul. Do you see the murder of Jack Kennedy to be a really major turning point?
Yes. It confirmed the power of the faction, which is the worst elements of the Anglo-American establishment today. The faction that had tried ever since Wall Street took over great power in the US at the beginning of the 20th century, they used the murder of Kennedy and his brother and Martin Luther King to shift the philosophy of the United States and the strategy of the country away from industrial progress, and also brought in a teaching of the population to accept the end of progress, not only in America, but in the world. America previously had been the major force for helping underdeveloped or less developed countries to get technology and industry. America brought Russia, Germany, and Japan into modern times, helped to do that. And as late as John Kennedy, we were building the dam in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, the leader of African nationalism, a great friend of John Kennedy. All of this point of view of the American system and the American Revolution was thrown out the window after the death of John Kennedy. So this murder was certainly a coup. And to understand how to get back to the kind of progress we had previously, you have to get a deeper narrative, a deeper understanding of what we did, how we accomplished the transformation of the United States from backwardness into great power status.
How did that happen? I mean, the rescue of capitalism by FDR that your father, I see, was a big supporter of. How did that happen? I mean, if JFK is the pivot, the turning point, and the murder of, so was the saving of capitalism by Roosevelt in the 1930s merely, as it were, a temporary stay?
I wouldn't put it in terms of saving capitalism. Franklin Roosevelt himself was a deep student of the American Revolution. And he went back to the point of view of Lincoln and earlier leaders who used the power of the state to improve the population's living standards and to gear up the industries of the United States to bring about greater powers over nature. Kennedy did the same thing with the space program, with other programs, financial and industrial. The original industrialization of the country occurred with a group of leaders such as Nicholas Biddle, Matthew Carey, John Quincy Adams, leaders of West Point, the military academy, and others, using government power and also military engineers and financing from all levels of government to build the first railroads, to build all the canals out to the Mississippi River. There was a team of strategists, including DeWitt Clinton, the governor of New York, the head of the Bank of the United States, Nicholas Biddle. These men worked to build up in a very rapid fashion a new power of production involving steam power, involving all the first railroads were all built by government funding, and Army engineers were the designers. The same faction also built the first railroad in Russia in this same time period in the 1840s. It was a very brief period in that section of the industrialization before the Civil War, a very brief period when the best leaders, these progressive nationalists, were actually in control of national power. We had very bad presidents, slave owners backed by Wall Street and London, City of London, for about 30 years before the Civil War. But in a brief span of time, principally the 1820s, we had a terrific leadership team. Lincoln repeated this and brought about measures that increased the power of the country to produce. The nationalists, the progressive nationalists based in Philadelphia, later backed Thomas Edison to build the first electric power plants. And this was resisted and opposed by J.P. Morgan, who is often wrongly portrayed as backing Edison. Complete lie. The present establishment that is the financier establishment, the offshore banks, the illegitimate financial establishment of today with their perpetual wars, they claim to themselves the credit under a free market and free trade system of having built up the power of the West. Completely false. They never built the industries. They never built the railroads. They took over other people's industrial projects, often looted and bankrupt them. The way they made their money initially was by looting and murder in India, in Ireland, in Africa. It was a completely contrary system. And one could say that when the British went to India, they were not bringing Western values to India. They were undermining the progress of India, closing their industries, and subjugating China with dope. These are not Western values. Western values are the Renaissance. Western values you see in Shakespeare. I also have a chapter in the book. The first chapter is about the English Industrial Revolution brought about by wonderful men associated with Benjamin Franklin. This is Wedgwood and Bolton and Watt in the circle of Franklin up in Birmingham, known as the Lunar Society. This was not the London establishment. These were men devoted, as were the Franklin Circle in America, devoted to the progress of all mankind. And they actually helped the American Revolution and resisted the British attempt to subjugate the colonies. All of these men were opposed to slavery, to black slavery. So that the racist, if you look at the real history of America, the racists in this period have no credit for building up the industries of the country, contrary to current kind of woke nonsense that's being published now, which claims that racism built America. Completely false. It was the racists who not only tried to destroy the country and secede from the Union, but they resisted all of the industrialization efforts. So this book undermines the legitimacy of the present globalist system. And I believe if we follow this kind of true history, which is optimistic, we will have a path toward a common interest approach to rebuilding civilization, which we urgently need to do. The United States and Russia and China and India and Brazil and South Africa, Germany, Japan, all the big countries ought to work together as partners to build the high-speed trains, to go back to the space program, to fight for better science that can give us cures for these pandemics. This is the future, and it lies in a reevaluation of the greatness of the West, which was not imperialism. The imperialists were responsible for no progress and only looting and murder. So this division between the two sides inside American society and inside American politics is crucial for people to understand. The builders, the developers versus the looters and the imperialists.
Anton, there's a fan of yours on the line. If you don't mind hanging on. It's Tarif, sure. Tarif in New Orleans. Tarif, welcome.
No, thank you for taking my call. Anton Chaitkin, you're one of the best historians out there. I met you in 2000 in Northern Virginia. I know you don't remember me, but you're a great historian. Of course, I like to say free journalist signs. I have two comments. Caitlyn Jenner is running for governor in California. It might seems like Governor Newsom might be recalled in California, and I think that might be a good thing. I don't know if the Republicans can win it or a Democrat with good American principles that believe in the Constitution can win it. I don't know, but he seemed like he's being recalled. My second comment is dealing with the Arizona recount. The Arizona recount has been started again. The ballots from the state and the ballot counting machines, 2.1 million ballots in the ballot counting machines from Maricopa County have been delivered to the Senate Republicans, right? So the Democrats sued the Republicans saying that it's not fair, that, they need to have extra security and whatnot so they can watch the count. So the judge also ordered the Democrats to put up a $1 million bail.
Okay, Tarif, let Anton, because he has to. We have to let him go. So let Anton respond. Go ahead, sir.
I would not get stuck in the issue of the recent election. We went through 4 years where Trump was attacked by the establishment and did not respond by educating the public about what we ought to do. We need to have the public focused on a program to develop our country and to work with other countries to save our economy and our civilization. We face a threat really of nuclear war if we go down the current path towards confrontation with Russia. We have a drastic deficit in our economy, in our physical economy. Not just the infrastructure, but the entire capacity to produce needs to have a new concept based on improvement of our power over nature. And we have a contrary presentation that both parties have agreed to, which has nothing to do with increasing that power over nature. We have to focus on industrial development for a 21st century upsurge in our powers. And we have a history that ought to show us how we can get a common interest program that 80 or 90% of the public would support. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have the population of the United States, and also in England the same way, the whole population support their own government? They would, if it was in the interest of the working people and the poor people and was based on a major industrialization push. We need nuclear power. We need the space program. We need fusion power in the future. And that means today we could focus on these problems that have to be solved.
Anton Chaitkin, author of Who We Are, America's Fight for Universal Progress, From Franklin to Kennedy, Volume 1, out now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Thanks to Tarif in New Orleans for that first call of the evening. And the first poll of the evening is now up. After the Super League debacle, what will change? A, nothing. B, they'll sell up. C, they'll try again. That's a tantalizing one. You can vote now on my Twitter feed. Coming up is Michael McCaffery, film and cultural critic, on the big one tonight, the Oscars. Give me a 2-minute break.
Radio Sputnik.
Let's take a call. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, George. Yeah, I just want to talk about the trans issue that you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah,
I've got
go
a book in front of me by Douglas Murray, and he's got a paragraph here that I'd just like to read out, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I was standing on the corner at a quarter.
All right, I'll get him off. He's a nutter. 02077 982 255 is the number if you're in the UK, or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480, or tweet me, of course.
Sputnik has been launched to give you a closer look at everything happening in the world. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
Well, that poll has taken off, and 35% of you think nothing will change. Only 4% of you think that the miscreant billionaire oligarchs and countries that own the clubs that tried to set up the Super League, only 4% of you think they'll be forced to divest. 61% of you think they'll try again. That is going to be a fascinating poll. Now, Sam says they will try again. Project Big Picture was only 6 months ago. It's only a matter of time. Ruben says, people comes between football and their wits. I don't agree with that, Ruben. Marek says there's plenty of changes could happen. For instance, the top 3 or 4 in the Scots Premier League playing in the English Premier playoffs for 3rd and 4th. But let it always be a working class game. No more elite competitions. Simon says it'll fail because it only financially benefits the clubs involved. It's detrimental by any other measure. And Scouser Lars says, to discourage making them try again, harsh punishments need to be dished out. I'm talking point deductions and a £100 million fine each. The money from the fines should then be distributed to grassroots football. I'd go along with that, although my club is one of them. Steve says that's what happens when capitalism gets out of control. And David says all the owners have 3 things in common. 1, money. 2, greed. 3, no knowledge of sport. They will try again if they think they can bleed more money out of the fans. And Mike says you better ask Sky. The UEFA, FIFA and the FA have just gained total control again. So you can vote now on my Twitter feed. Do have your say. Michelle is in Slough, and she's up next. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, hello, George. Do you know what? I thought, with everything else going on, and especially, being a woman and not feeling safe on the streets anymore, for the first time since we were doing the Stop the War coalition, and I think the last time I actually stood was 14 years ago, I put my money where my mouth is and stand for the Green Party. Do you know, I really didn't think that tricks could get any dirtier than they were that long ago, George.
Oh, they are much dirtier now.
Well, some things, when honestly I thought I'd seen it all, some things just never failed to amaze me. Anyway.
Tell us, give us a flavour of it.
Well, basically, no names mentioned, but I've got, let's talk about hoppers. Hoppers is my topic there. People that hop from party to party for no good reason other than, they seem to leave a trail of disaster in wherever they've been. I don't want to say too much more about it than that, because I've got some really serious concerns about some of the things I've seen in the last week, including a local radio show that turned up 3 weeks ago and a live hustings that suddenly turned out to be somebody on a pre-recorded one that laid straight into me, questioning my religious beliefs because I'm a spiritualist.
Well, spiritualists have rights too, and I can't see why that would be a barrier to representing the good people of Slough. Michelle?
Well, one of the 7 principles of spiritualism is divine retribution here and in the now and in the hereafter.
Yeah, I believe in that too.
Yes, so do I. It's one of the 7 principles. Go look it up. I try and live by them. More importantly, it's the silver birch stuff and trying to look after our environment. I do actually try and live by my principles, looking after Mother Nature. Mother Nature's a girl, so I'm doing green for girls.
Well, good luck to you, Michelle. We can't go further.
Well, hang on. I want to issue a challenge, George.
All right, go on.
Because I've had enough dirty tricks. So I want to see, we've seen all about this game stuff in the news, so I want to issue a challenge to everybody else that, talks a lot of hot air and doesn't put their money where their mouth is. So I'm going to do it first on here, on your show and live.
Okay.
So there's no misunderstanding about what I said. I'd like to issue you a challenge to my opposition candidates for a fair, socially distanced space hopper race.
Okay, you've done it.
Now,
you heard it here. Michelle in Slough is challenging her opponents to a space hopper race. I'm not sure she got my vote with that call, but at least she sparked a debate in Slough, I'm sure. Now, in a couple of hours, I guess, the Oscars begin. Once upon a time, I'd know all the films that were up, and I'd have a point of view on who should win. This year, I don't, which is therefore just as well that film and cultural critic Michael McCaffery is on the line to help us through it. Michael, thanks very much for joining us. First of all, to what extent can you have Oscars? Are there films still coming out? And where do you see them? On Netflix?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big problem this year, George. You are not alone. By the way, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Welcome.
And that's the problem with this year's Oscars is you are not alone. Most people don't care. And, you know, even in the industry, I've never seen an Oscar season where there's less energy and less discussion about it. And in the general population, people just haven't seen these movies. They have not connected to any of these films because they're all smaller films. You know, last year was a strange year for everyone, of course, and the film industry was no different. So the studios didn't put out big pictures because theaters were closed. And so there aren't any blockbusters up for awards. There are mostly art house films that are up. And so people don't have an opinion one way or the other, which is not great for the Oscars. And the Oscars are already in a very precarious situation, considering last year the ratings were the lowest they've ever been. For the last 10 years, they've been declining precipitously. So it's a tough time, and I don't know the answer to how you fix that, because people aren't going to go back to the theaters right away. And these movies, you can get them on Netflix or Hulu or Amazon or video on demand and things like that, but they just aren't generating huge amounts of energy and interest one way or the other.
Well,
so you consider
just before we go into the runners and riders, let's deal with if you'll forgive the pun, the bigger picture. I have all of my life been a cinema goer. I'm not sure the extent to which I see cinema coming out of the other end of this. I mean, video didn't kill the radio star, thank God, or the cinema, but it did wound it. But now I can watch a movie every night on any one of those platforms that you mentioned without going out, without spending, 50 or more pounds on transport and tickets and popcorn and so on. Do you think cinema is done for?
Oh boy, George. I think cinema is going through a transformation, and like you, I love going to the cinema. I'm a cinephile. This is what I do for a living. But it's in deep trouble, because all the things you mentioned about how much it costs to go to the movies. I mean, you're buying tickets, you're buying, getting a babysitter, for instance, or traveling there. And then you have to deal with, and this is the thing nobody wants to talk about, all the people who are in the theater with you, who are looking at their phones, who are talking, who are not really interested in anything but socializing, as opposed to watching this movie that you paid however many dollars for.
Yeah.
So,
and they might be coughing and sneezing too.
That's the other problem now is, I get paid to watch these movies, and I don't want to go back into a theater just yet. And that's because you're in this enclosed space. You get paranoid about all this stuff, and you're just like, I'll just sit at home and watch it. I can turn it off when I want to go to the bathroom and not miss anything. I can eat something without disturbing other people. I don't have to, pay $50 to get a babysitter, all those sorts of things. So cinema's in trouble. There's no doubt about it. What's more in trouble are the Academy Awards, because nobody cares about them anymore. They seem completely obsolete. And it's just absurd when you think about it. After the year we've had, to get together and have rich, famous people who are patting each other on the back at some event, it just seems so bizarre. But cinema itself, the art of cinema, is changing. And so movies will change in terms of, they know they're not going to be on a big screen. For instance, a director is going to make a different type of movie. So, you know, like you think about the all-time greats, like would David Lean be able to make Lawrence of Arabia if it's going to run on Netflix? You know, that's just the sort of thing that everything's going to get scaled down and the waters get muddy. And so a TV movie is the same as a theatrical release movie. They look the same. They're both of the same scale. They both sort of attract the same audience. So that's difficult for cinema and the movie business. But in terms of the art of cinema, it sort of helps in some ways in that more people get opportunities. Directors can take bigger chances in terms of the material they want to make and the stories they want to tell. But everything will be smaller. And
well, let me test you with an example of that. Sure. The last movie I watched was The Mauritanian, made by a Glasgow man, as it happened, about a man unjustly imprisoned in Guantanamo Bay for more than 15 years, and it's a true story. But it was narrowed down. I mean, there were no big vistas in that movie. It was up close and personal. Dialogue was much more important than if you like, the cinematography. Is that the kind of future that you're envisaging?
Yes, that's going to be the norm. And the big event pictures, so, you know, some Star Wars thing or Avengers or some superhero thing, that will be the few films that are seen on big screens. Those are going to be the films, the big action things that need all of that space and all of that bombast to go with it.
Yeah, sound and scale of the images.
Yeah, and that's, you know, I understand that. It's sort of disheartening for me as a movie lover. I remember last year I went and saw Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the Quentin Tarantino film, and I saw it. They showed it on 35 millimeter, which most theaters are digital now. And on 35 millimeter, it was beautiful to look at. The sound was amazing. And I saw it again a few weeks later on digital, and it wasn't quite as good. Everything gets a little bit thinner in terms of sound and the visuals. And
well, look, long before you were born, Michael, and I talked about it earlier because this is the anniversary of the mutiny. I remember the mutiny on the Bounty, which would be in the mid-60s, maybe, I'm guessing. But it was an epic, and it was a real event, and there was not so many movies then, and of course television was a very different animal, no Netflix, nothing like that. That kind of epic, it's going to be a rare event, isn't it?
It is. It's going to be a rare event. And the other thing that comes up with this topic is that movies have stopped being driven by movie stars, and they're driven by intellectual property. So, you know, Marvel movies, DC movies, Star Wars movies, as opposed to, you know, I'm not quite that young, but when I was a kid, you know, Burt Reynolds had a stretch in the late 70s going into, I think, 81, where he was the top box office draw in the world. And when you look at the list of movies he made for 5 years in a row or 4 years in a row, where he held this title, they are the worst movies you'll ever think of. They're just ridiculously poor movies.
I think I may have seen some, yeah.
Right, yeah. But Burt Reynolds was this big megastar, this person people went to the theater just to see him. And guys wanted to be him, girls wanted to be with him, that whole routine. And we don't have that anymore. Even the biggest movie stars we have, be it, you know, Leonardo DiCaprio or George Clooney or people like that, Brad Pitt, they don't bring people out to the theater. It just doesn't happen. They have to be in a good movie to get people to go see that movie, as opposed to people will just go see, you know, Brad Pitt, do whatever. It's not true. They won't. He had a movie out last year, Ad Astra, which was actually quite a good movie, and he's quite good in it. But nobody went to see it. Nobody cared because it wasn't an Avengers movie. It wasn't, you know, an Ocean's 11 movie with all these multiple stars in it to sort of draw people in. So
that is all tremendously riveting, actually, and I could talk to you all night about it, but I guess we should talk about what's up in the Oscars tonight. Give us the runners and riders, Michael.
I will. I'll go through the top 6 categories and just I saw these movies, George, so you don't have to, and that's my gift to you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in the first big categories we'll see tonight, if God help you, you stay up that late and watch these things, is actress in a supporting role, best actress in a supporting role. The nominees are Maria Bakalova for Borat, subsequent movie film, Glenn Close for Hillbilly Elegy, Olivia Colman for The Father, Amanda Seyfried for Mank, and Yoo Jung-yoon for Minari. Now, this has been set in stone for as long as the Oscar season has been happening, that Yoo Jung-yoon is going to win. She won the SAG Award. She won the BAFTA Award. She's going to win this award. Minari is not, as a cinephile, I'm saying this, it's an art house film. It's not very good. I didn't like it. Other people may have different tastes, may enjoy it. She's very charming in it. She plays a sort of fire starter grandmother, no pun intended, and she's good. There are other good performances. Maria Bakalova is hysterically funny in the Borat movie. She's balls to the wall sort of performance and should be congratulated for it. But Yoo Jung-yoon is going to win, and that should set the tone for the night. But we'll see. The next category is Best Actor in a Supporting Role. And this, again, is set in stone, but I'll read the names. Sacha Baron Cohen for A Trial of Chicago 7. Daniel Kaluuya for Judas and the Black Messiah. Leslie Odom Jr. for One Night in Miami. Paul Raci for Sound of Metal. And Lakeith Stanfield for Judas and the Black Messiah. Now, this is set in stone that it's going to Daniel Kaluuya. He's won everything, just like the other categories. He's going to win. But, George, if you're watching, pay attention. Because if there's a huge upset and he doesn't win and it goes to Sacha Baron Cohen, which is the only other person conceivable could win it, we're going to have a crazy night at the Oscars because Sacha Baron Cohen is terrible in that movie. The Trial of the Chicago 7 is a terrible movie, but it's an old, traditional Hollywood Oscar movie that older Academy members...
Michael, I think that Baron Cohen was playing Borat in that movie.
I agree. I wrote a review about it, and I said, I've never seen a collection of accents thrown into one character in my whole life. It was Borat. It was a Brooklynite. It was Boston. It was Chicago. It was a posh British accent. It was crazy. And the movie itself is quite, it's something else. I was just like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
Very poor.
So if he wins that award, which God help us, but if he does, that means that movie might have a big night, and that will make the Oscars interesting in hindsight, as opposed to as we go into them and nobody watches.
We're almost out of time, Michael, so go to Best Picture.
Best Picture is a piece of cake. I'm telling you, George. It's Nomadland is going to win. It's won everything. It's came out in September. It won the Venice Golden Lion. It won the Producers Guild. It won the Golden Globes. It won the BAFTAs. It's winning Best Picture. Its director, Chloe Zhao, is going to win Best Director. That's what's going to happen tonight. The only thing to watch, I'll be as quick as possible, is Best Actress. I think Viola Davis will win. There's a chance Carey Mulligan wins. There's a chance Frances McDormand wins. That's the only one that's up in the air. Everything else is set in stone.
Do you know what, Michael? I'm not even going to stay up for it. You watch it so I don't have to.
I will. That's the sacrifice I'll make for you, George. That's what I'm here for.
Michael McCaffery, film critic and cultural critic extraordinaire. Thank you very much indeed for joining us
George.
On the mother of all talk shows. After the Super League debacle, what will change? Nothing. 35%. They'll sell up 4%. They'll try again. Still 61%. You can vote on my Twitter feed. Coming up after the news, it is Barry Silkman, who was a fantastic footballer, if you're old enough to remember him, a real Messi type footballer at Manchester City and many, many other clubs, including in Israel, but Crystal Palace also. A real football star who never made really very much money out of the game, but he makes sure that his clients make very, very much money because he's one of the country's top football agents, and we'll get his perspective on the Super League debacle. But after the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson paid for renovations to his Downing Street flat, quote, from his own pocket, according to one of his ministers. International Trade Secretary Liz Truss said, quote, everything has been fully declared in line with the rules. But she did not answer repeated questions on whether a Tory party donor initially provided the money to him. It comes after the PM's former chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, claimed Johnson had a, quote, possibly illegal plan for donors to pay for the refurbishment. The Labour Party said questions remained as details over how the work was paid for had yet to be made public. The government is supposed to publish the list of ministers' interests twice a year, but the last one, showing money donated to them, was released in July 2020. Johnson lives in a flat above 11 Downing Street with his fiancée Carrie Simmons. In March, Downing Street dismissed speculation suggesting that refurbishments on the flat last year would be paid for by Tory donors through a charity set up for this purpose, amid reports that the cost had spiralled out of control. But on Friday, Cummings launched a blistering attack on his former boss via his blog, claiming that he advised the PM the renovation plans were, quote, unethical, foolish, possibly illegal, and almost certainly broke the rules on proper disclosure of political donations if conducted in the way he intended. Truss condemned the allegations as tittle-tattle. Britain is to send ventilators to India as the country faces an oxygen crisis amid a record surge in COVID cases. The first plane load is expected to leave today. 8 further loads are expected to be sent in the next few days. The surge in cases has been accompanied by severe shortages of medical oxygen in some areas, with hospitals warning they could run out within hours. For the 4th day in a row, India has set an unwelcome world record for new coronavirus infections, with 349,691 more cases in the 24 hours to Sunday morning, and another 2,767 lives lost. Most hospitals are full, and many of them are refusing new admissions owing to the uncertainty over oxygen supply. The capital, Delhi, has been reporting more than 24,000 cases daily in the past few days. The hospitals are completely overrun and healthcare workers are said to be exhausted. An Indonesian Navy submarine that sank off the coast of Bali on Wednesday has been found split into 3 pieces on the seabed, officials say. All of the vessel's 53 crew have been confirmed dead. Navy officials said they had received signals from the sub's location more than 800 metres deep early today. An underwater rescue vehicle loaned by Singapore was sent down to get visual confirmation of the wreckage. The KRI Nanggala disappeared after requesting permission to drive during a torpedo drill. The reason for its sinking is not yet clear. At least 82 people have been killed in a fire at a hospital treating coronavirus patients in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. More than 100 others were injured in the blaze, which erupted at the Ibn Khatib hospital on Saturday night. Reports say an accident had caused an oxygen tank to explode, sparking the blaze. Videos on social media show firefighters scrambling to extinguish the flames as people flee the building. Movie stars are preparing for tonight's Academy Awards, the Oscars, which will take place across multiple locations worldwide. Unlike recent awards ceremonies such as the Golden Globes, BAFTAs and Emmys, the Oscars have asked nominees to attend one of the locations in person. Films including Nomadland, Minari and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom could perform strongly in some of the major categories. The world of English football is uniting behind a social media boycott in a bid to combat the sustained racist abuse received by players online. clubs in the Premier League, English Football League, Women's Super League and Women's Championship, along with the game's governing bodies and organisations such as Kick It Out, will turn off their Facebook and Twitter and Instagram accounts from April the 30th until May the 1st. In a joint statement, the group said the boycott hoped to, quote, emphasise that social media companies must do more to eradicate online hate. The joint statement also referred to an open letter signed by English Football in February, which urged social media companies to filter, block and quickly take down offensive posts while improving the verification process of accounts. And finally, the pandemic may be raging. Quarantine rules are changing by the day, and there's still an uncertainty over when and where we can go on holiday. But one thing remains constant: the houses in Italy on sale for €1 or 87 pence if you're a Brit. It's the turn of another Sicilian town, Castiglione di Sicilia, to offer houses for less than the price of a coffee. On the slopes of Mount Etna near chic Taormina and the beaches of Scilly's east coast, the town is selling roughly 900 abandoned homes. Most are located in the oldest parts of the town, around half are ruined and will be given away at a symbolic price of just €1. The rest are in better condition and will be sold off cheaply, starting from €4,000. Mayor Antonio Camada has undertaken an ambitious project to breathe new life into his village, where the population has shrunk from 14,000 in the early 1900s to barely 3,000 today. Unlike other towns operating similar schemes, which have put together a job lot of houses for €1, Castiglione di Sicilia is pricing the properties according to their condition. If there's a lot of interest for the same property, an auction will be held. Buyers must complete renovations within 3 years. Unlike most other schemes, however, there is no deposit payable to guarantee doing the works. Instead, they are requiring owners to take out an insurance policy from a bank worth €4,000. Local taxes are low in Sicily compared to the rest of Italy, and buyers can also take advantage of the Italian government's super bonus scheme that dishes out tax credits of 110% for renovations which make houses more environmentally friendly. Many former residents of the town migrated to Australia and South America in search of a brighter future. Their descendants never returned, causing the family homes to fall into oblivion. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
Now, you may know nothing about football and care even less, but this next interview with the super agent Barry Silkman is really nothing to do with football. It is a metaphor of the world that we now live in, where the masses, in this case you could hardly get a bigger mass, half of the planet, support the football teams that were intending to break away from their domestic moorings and form a cartel of their own, endlessly playing each other for nothing that anyone would recognize as a trophy, with no promotion, no relegation, in the cartel forever, based only on the fact that you're rich. Certainly couldn't have been based on the fact that you're good. Tottenham Hotspur last won the English top league in 1962. Arsenal, how could these two teams be regarded as super? How could they get promoted into a European Super League? The answer is they could not, and they had no need to, because the pocketbooks of their owners had already purchased them a ticket for life. Teams like Ajax, genuine European football superpowers, not in the European Super League. Teams like Paris Saint-Germain, PSG, who might well win the Champions League this year, I hope myself that they do, not in the European Super League. Bayern Munich, one of the greatest teams in the world, German champions, not in the European Super League, because they're not In the case of Bayern Munich, not PSG, but in the case of Bayern Munich, they are owned by the fans and are not in the Super Financial League strata. So it would have been a cartel entirely dependent on the wealth of the owners, and they thought that they could get away with it, so much so they released the news about their fiendish plan with such rank amateurism that it didn't stand a chance once the public, the people, began to have their say. And Barry Silkman, as I told you, who'll be coming up shortly, was a very fine footballer, but he's an even better agent. I happen to know some of the people he's the agent for, but I can't tell you, and he won't tell you either. Let's just say that he is able to raise for his clients more per week than he would earn in 10 seasons during his playing career. But he has a perspective on the European Super League, which is different from mine, and that's why I'm looking forward to you hearing it. Coming up after the 9 o'clock news, of course, is Dr. Ranjeet Brar. The doctor will see you then. So call me now if you've got a question about the coronavirus. If you want to talk about vaccine passports, you want to talk about the terrible situation in India, or the havoc that took place in London, in Hyde Park last evening. Of course, we've been following the Derek Chauvin trial, the George Floyd murder case. We'll be going at 8:30 to our special correspondent, Michael, in Minneapolis, who will bring us up to date with what happened there. Now, here are the numbers. 02077 982 255 if you're in the UK. 02077 982 255. If you're in the US, it's 001 757 744 4480. Or you can tweet us, of course, at George Galloway, at RTUK News. Please, at both of us. The wizard, the super agent, the former Manchester City and many other clubs, but not Manchester United, star Barry Silkman is now on the line. Barry, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Let's start with, because I know your point of view, but the audience doesn't. So let me hear your unvarnished take on the Super League.
First of all, good evening, George.
Good evening.
And at times I wish I had played for Man United, then you would have been cheering me on.
I did cheer you anyway. I loved you as a player.
I know. But
and City were no rivals to us back then.
No, exactly. And also, I think, George, you'd have been loving me more if I was wearing red.
Yes, definitely.
I think that, as we have spoken about previously, I don't think they handled it properly. I think it was handled all wrong. It came out in the press very, very quickly. I don't think there was any real planning over it. If they would have sat down and explained exactly what they were doing, how they wanted to do it, it may have not got the reaction it got. But because it was as though, okay, we're leaving the Premier League and we're joining a new league. But I don't really think they meant it like that. The money that they would have received, I've got no doubt whatsoever, they would have been able to field two teams just as strong as each other. So that, as an example, right now, there are maybe 17 or 18 players that are good enough to get regular first team games. And then you've got another 8 on the bench that are not really what I would call first team players. But these clubs would have gone out and bought another 5, 6, 7 players. So in effect, they'd have had at least 20, 21, 22 first team players good enough to play regularly. And I think at that stage, they would have fielded as many players as they could regularly in both leagues. but they'd have had 5 or 6 standbys or even 8 standbys, maybe at sometimes even all 11, but they would have been just as good. And I don't think the explanation how they wanted to do that ever came across, because it seems to me that they went at it a bit like a bull at a gate. They didn't do an explanation. It was just, okay, we've signed up to go to another league. I don't think this has gone away, George. I think what it's done, it's like a suspended sentence, if you like. And it may be another 5, 6, 7 years, but I've got a feeling this will come back again. Whether it will be exactly the same teams, I wouldn't like to say. But I think this will come back again, because financially, the rewards, George, are astronomical. And I don't think that clubs, because of the financial situation we've all been in the last year and a half, and maybe the financial situation will be in for the next few years, I don't think that they could just walk away from it and think, well, we won't revisit it. I'm almost sure it will get revisited. Whether it would be exactly the same teams again, I wouldn't have a bet on that. But I would say, and knowing that this has been in the pipeline for at least 5 years, because I knew about it 5 years ago, and I'm sure I wasn't the first one to know. So looking at all that, I would say at some stage, George, and I wouldn't put a bet when it is, but at some stage, this is going to come back again.
Now, that's the 22 players, 2 teams, sounds like a lot of good work for you as an agent. I think you'd have been in clover, as would the players. But there's a number of things that your analysis presuppose. Why would the UEFA, FIFA, and the English Premiership, why would they tolerate the presence of Arsenal or Tottenham in their competition when Arsenal and Tottenham and the others had stabbed them in the back, left their orbit for Wednesday night bonanza that would have netted them billions?
Well, in effect, George, if they'd have had 2 teams of equal, or more or less equal ability, they wouldn't be stabbing them in the back. So that would clear that situation up. But I understand exactly what you're saying. And from let's take from a Premier League point of view first. As for UEFA and FIFA, I don't deal so much with them, but I do deal with the Premier League. So as for the Premier League, the biggest thing that they have in their favour right now, especially the other clubs, is Sky Television. And you know, and I know that it's because of Sky Television, the finances are in the game that are in today. I mean, in my day, if you got 150 quid a week when I first started, it was a miracle. I mean, I ended up, my biggest ever wage was £550 a week basic, which is the equivalent today of around £2,500–3,000 a week. And that was at Man City. And I think if I was at Man City now, I might be getting a little bit more than £2,500 or £3,000 a week. So when you look now at the Premier League, they rely on Liverpool, Chelsea, not so much Arsenal, I wouldn't say, but certainly Liverpool, Chelsea, Man United, Manchester City. Those clubs rely on them being in the Premier League to get the money that Sky throw at them. Now, let's just take a mad example. They will get suspended and get thrown out. Do you think at the end of Sky Television's contract, or even during the contract, that Sky will not say, well, hold on a minute, this is not our agreement. Our agreement were the best clubs in the country were in the Premier League. This is what we paid for. So I'm sure at some stage, either when their contract is up or before, they will say, we're really sorry, we've got to cut the money, and we've got to cut it by 50%, which at that stage, more or less, every club's gone bankrupt because no one can foot the salaries. So then the clubs are going to have to go to the players and say, look, unless you take a 50, 60% wage reduction, we're not even going to be able to keep going. Now, there may be a lot of players in them clubs go, well, do you know what? I'm earning £50,000 a week now. I can take £25,000 a week. It's not such a bad deal. It's still £14,000 a week after tax, whatever. Maybe some will. But your better players, your top players at those clubs are going to say no. Now, then there's an option. Do the club then put it in writing that they offer them a new deal on a less salary? And they can't keep their contract going now. They have to cancel that contract, but they will give them a deal on, let's say, 40% less because they need to try and keep the better players. The minute a player receives an offer less than what he is earning now, and he's coming to the end of his contract or his contract is cancelled, he becomes a free transfer because you can't offer a player under FA rules less money than he's earning now. So it becomes a massive dilemma for clubs. So it's all well and good where I've read in the paper people saying sling them out, all over Facebook, chuck all these clubs out, suspend them for a year or 2 years or never let them get back in. Well, if that happened and players didn't take a massive wage reduction, there would be no Premier League. If the Premier League folds, George, you and I know, everything else underneath it will fold like a pack of cards. So somewhere along the line, there has to be some sense that's not led by emotion. When you're a football supporter, you get very emotional. I'm lucky. I stopped supporting clubs when I was 16 years old, when I started playing football and became a professional footballer. I stopped supporting the team that I played for. All I supported then was the teams that I was playing for at the time. So I've never got emotional about football. And I think a lot of the things that have happened now, people have had it emotion-led rather than sensibility-led, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, but someone like you who've made your living since you were a teenager out of football in one position or another is different from me. As I put it to you the other day, see, I'm not a customer of my football teams, one in Scotland, one in England. I'm not a customer. Because a customer, if they're dissatisfied with what's on offer in the shop, they can walk across the road and buy from another shop. People like me are not like that. We support the teams we support because our fathers did and took us as boys, because our grandfathers even did. So emotion is actually built in. It's in the DNA of the game, isn't it?
Oh, George, I wouldn't disagree with you. I wouldn't even say you're 0.5% wrong. I'd say you are 1 billion% right. But I can only come from a perspective of the, if you like, of earning a living. As you say, I've earned a living out of football, more or less, my whole working life, okay? All but a few years I've earned my living out of football. And yes, of course, the emotional side is huge. But if you take the emotional side away, let's put it another way. You're looking at Manchester United now, okay? And we both know they probably need 4 players much better than they've got now.
Yeah, especially after today.
To compete to win the Premier League. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yeah, for sure. 4 or 5, yeah.
Right, let's just say, and I'm not saying this is a reality, I'm just taking this as an example, as a dream, if you like. Let's just say Manchester United went out and they spent, let's say 500-600 million, 700 million on 10 or 11 or 12 players, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And they added 3 players to the team that's playing today, and they remained in the Premier League. And the other 8 who they bought were all absolutely amazing players. And those 8 were 8 of the players that take part starting in the, if you like, the European Super League. How disappointed would you be? Or would you say, do you know what? I love this Super League because it's made us go out and buy the 3 or 4 players we really need to compete for the Premier League. So we've still got an incredible team, but also we've got 8 absolutely outstanding players in our Super League, or the other way round.
Interesting. It's interesting, Barry, and it's provoking a big response. Stay on the line if you would, because Simon in London has a lot to say on this subject. Simon, welcome.
How you doing, George? You okay?
Yes, good. What would you like to say to Barry?
Yeah, like I said, I actually want this Super League to go ahead. I know it will disappoint a lot of people, but within the last couple of months, I've lost complete faith in football. And the reason I want it to go ahead is not because I'm in favour of it, but because I want these Super 6 clubs to, in essence, craft their own doom without any competition, without any other teams playing against them, especially from the English leagues. They're not going to get anywhere. No one's going to want to play for them. I also think that it's a disgrace that for years, I mean, it's a case of whose monopoly is it anyway. For years, the Champions League was on ITV. People could watch the Champions League for absolutely free on ITV. That then got transferred to Sky Sports, and then the odd game here and there could be shown on the terrestrial television, you know. And then that got transferred completely to BT Sport. So, and now now UEFA and FIFA and all these national leagues, the FA and the Spanish League and so on, are crying about the football now being on another monopoly run by JP Morgan. So, like I said, although I feel very sorry for the fans who support these teams and the other business owners who kind of like base themselves off these teams, you know, I don't feel sorry for the clubs at all. And I hope this does go through. I personally hope that this plan did go through, because I was hoping that they'd become bankrupt and then
become pariahs. Okay, Simon, thanks for that. Simon brings up an interesting point that I know that we both agree on. There is a lot of hypocrisy in the hue and cry from some sections of the media, because I'd actually forgotten what Simon said, that I used to watch the Champions League for free. And now, not only do I have to buy Sky to watch the Premier League, I've got to buy BT to watch the Champions League. So actually, my wife doesn't quite know how much money I'm spending to watch football. He's got a point, doesn't he, Barry?
Well, I've got to say, George, I think when you go home tonight, she's going to ask.
She's going to ask.
At that stage, I think it's all over for you. So let me know what hospital you're in, George. Yeah, I mean, look, you know, we've touched on this before, you and I. When I played the game, maybe when, you know, even to the time that Simon's talking about, football was 80% sports and 20% business. And sadly, or not so sadly, depends who you are and how you look at it, football has now become 80% business and only 20% sport. So, yes, I understand exactly what he's saying, but at the moment, the way things are, so much in sport is changing. You know, even you look at tennis has changed, so much has changed. But football has become huge, George. I mean, when I played, if anyone would have said to me at the time, people were going to pay to watch you play, I said, yeah, only the people that come into the game, into the stadiums. And if they said, no, they're going to pay fortunes to watch you on television, I would have laughed. I would have thought they'd lost the plot, you know. But as time goes on, football has become a huge, huge business, not just for the football clubs, for TV companies all over the world, for commentators, for pundits. You know, there's some pundits now getting £2 million a year.
What?
Some getting more. Would you have ever heard of that in your life?
Oh.
You go days when John Motson started, he done well if he got £300 a week. I mean, it's just changed, George. And, you know, we either go along with it and for what it is, or we stop watching. That really is the bottom line. And I'm not saying I disagree with Simon. I'm not saying I agree with him. I can understand exactly what he's saying. But from when he goes back to, football has come, whether it's for the good or the bad, a long, long, long way.
Yeah. Barry, look, last question, because we're out of time. In fact, we're over time. I understand that many football clubs want to make more money. But let me ask you why Manchester City, your old stamping ground, they're in football because they are the ruling family of a vastly rich country, an oil-rich country. They don't need to make any money. They're not in football to make money. They're in football for reputational reasons. And they have deservedly gained a great deal of reputation with the way they've handled Manchester City. They've built a wonderful team, a wonderful stadium. They've developed the surrounding area of Manchester to a marvellous degree. Why did they make the reputationally damaging decision to go into this European Super League debacle?
Well, as I said, George, it might have been that it never come across properly. Does that make sense? What we spoke early on. I don't think the PR, as you quite rightly said at one time the other day, I don't think the PR they did was that good. So I get exactly what you're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think the PR was so bad, was so badly thought out. In fact, I don't think it was thought out at all, that they've given themselves this reputation, if you like, of greed. And that is the one thing you can't say about Manchester City. In fact, I'd go as far as to say, if we got rid of this fair play, which I find absolutely ridiculous, because if you own a business, any business in the world, you can spend as much as you like. If you and me open a restaurant and we've got £50 million between us, what's to stop us spending 13 million on the restaurant? We can spend what we want. It's our money. So I find the fair play strange. So therefore, I think that what's happened here, they've not gone in it for the money. They've gone in it for the prestige without thinking out loud what they were actually planning. I really think a lot of this is down to desperately bad PR or no PR, and the whole thing has come back, and it's like walking against a gale force wind, throwing a glass of water in the air and hoping it doesn't come.
They should have hired you, Barry. They would have done a lot better. Thank you.
I wish they did, mate. I'd be a lot wealthier and I'd be taking you out for a huge meal.
Thank you very much. Barry Silkman, super football agent extraordinaire. If you've got a point of view on this, call me 02077 982 255. Or if you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Now, I don't need a break. Do I have to take one? This is the spot where I roll back the years, how I wish I could, and look at the 7 days this week in our past, which shaped our present and, of course, no doubt, our future. This is the week. On this day in 1792, the guillotine was first used in France, executing highwayman Nicolas Pelletier. Previously, the sword was the favoured method, much cleaner the old newfangled death device, which was introduced to replace it. It was so new that the poor prisoner had to wait 3 months while it was built. They tested it on corpses before the real thing. Well, what can you say? The French eat horses. Also, in this day, in 1953, I'm amazed it was that long ago, our DNA structure was discovered when Francis Crick and James Watson published the double helix structure of it in Nature magazine. Now, I confess to not knowing what this means exactly, but it led to many convictions and innumerable crime shows. A year later, in 1954, Bell Laboratories announced the creation of the first solar battery made from silicon. It had about 6% efficiency. More than 60 years later, we don't seem to have come a great deal further, although no doubt electric car pioneer Elon Musk would dispute that. How is it that this vastly expensive mini computer of mine runs out of power in about 15 or 20 minutes? In 1980, a top secret copper-maiming attempt by the United States to free American hostages held in Iran's capital, Tehran, collapsed in ignominious failure with the death of 8 soldiers. The mission ran into trouble almost as soon as it started. 2 helicopters went down with engine trouble, and a third was diverted to help. Then another helicopter was damaged as it landed on the airstrip, leaving only 5 workable helicopters. President Carter ordered the operation to abort, and it was then that the farce became a tragedy. A helicopter crashed into one of the C-130 transport aircraft and burst into flames. It took 444 days thereafter of intense diplomatic activity, which secured the release of the remaining 52 hostages. That and a bit of money under the table. In 1983, in this week, Margaret Thatcher's invasion plan to recapture the Falkland Islands seized by Argentina had its first success when Royal Marines took the remote island of South Georgia. In the same year, the hoax that was the Hitler Diaries broke when Stern magazine published the first installment. Vast amounts of money had changed hands for these supposed Hitler jottings, but it was all an elaborate, but not actually all that sophisticated, hoax. And among other media that was snared by it was the Sunday Times. A very quick forensics check proved that the paper the diaries were written on hadn't been around when Hitler was about. Later, Stern journalist Gerd Heidemann revealed that he had obtained them from a Stuttgart dealer in military relics, Konrad Kujau. The 2 men were found guilty of fraud and forgery in 1985 and sentenced to jail terms of just 4.5 years each, with time off for good behaviour. Kujau later made a career of his notoriety, selling his acknowledged forgeries of famous paintings until his death in September 2000. Gerd Heidemann, however, was revealed in 2002 to have worked for the East German secret police. His Stasi file indicated he was still active in 1983 while the forgeries were taking place. The plot thickens. This was the week in 1975 when Labour Party members voted by almost 2-1 to leave the European Economic Community, underlining the deep divisions over the issue of Europe which remain to this day. If only they'd kept to that policy, Jeremy Corbyn would be the Prime Minister of Britain now, although he'd probably have been overthrown in a military coup as a result of the coronavirus disaster. America's greatest maritime disaster occurred in this week in 1865, when the steamboat SS Sultana, there it is, exploded in the Mississippi River, killing up to 1,800 of the 2,400 passengers. Most of them were paroled Union prisoners of war on their way home from the Civil War. And in this week in 1945, Italian partisans captured Benito Mussolini at Dongo on Lake Como. 3 days later, they executed him. I don't know why they hung about, although Musso and his missus posthumously ended up hanging from lampposts. The Second World War was almost over in this week in 1945. The Axis powers defeated when American and Russian troops joined hands at the River Elbe in Germany, bringing the end of the war a step closer. Imagine that picture now. 3 days later, Adolf Hitler committed suicide with his wife of only a few hours, Eva Braun, in the underground bunker from where he had been directing operations. Or did they? In 1956, undefeated world heavyweight boxing champion and an idol of mine, Rocky Marciano, retired from the ring, undefeated, after 49 straight wins, and 43 of those were knockouts. Amongst those, Britain's horizontal champion, Don Cockell, whom Rocky knocked out. In 1770 this week, British captain James Cook aboard the Endeavour landed at Botany Bay in Australia, discovering the country, at least for the white settlers. His party killed an Aborigine, just as a way of showing what was to come. Still seaborne, in 1789, Fletcher Christian led the mutiny on the Bounty, on HMS Bounty, against its captain, the cruel William Bligh. In the South Pacific, you may have seen Marlon Brando play Christian in the movie. It changed Marlon Brando's life, and not necessarily for the better. Glenn Miller this week recorded what became his theme tune, Pennsylvania 6-5000, in 1940. And in 1967, this week, Aretha Franklin released R-E-S-P-E-C-T, Respect. I found out what it meant to me. It became a theme tune of mine. And this week, in 1992, fierce rioting broke out in Los Angeles following the decision by an all-white jury, amazing how many of those there were, to acquit 4 white police officers accused of beating black motorist Rodney King. The riots lasted several days. The violence killed 55 people, and 2,000 were injured, with a further 12,000 arrested. The 4 acquitted police officers faced a second trial a year later on federal charges this time of violating Rodney King's civil rights. Stacey Koon and Lawrence Powell were found guilty, each serving 2 years in jail. Timothy Wind and Theodore Brisno were cleared. And it was the best of times for Charles Dickens, this week in 1859, when the first installment of his Tale of Two Cities debuted in a literary periodical. The war in Vietnam ended this week in 1975 as the government in Saigon announced its unconditional surrender to the Viet Cong resistance forces that smashed through the gates of the presidential palace. A man called Min, I seem to recall, Big Min, was the last president of the puppet South Vietnamese regime. A couple of years before, in 1973, this week, the US President Richard Nixon claimed he'd taken full responsibility for the Watergate scandal, the break-in to the Democratic Party headquarters. But he denied any personal involvement. I mean, he didn't actually climb through the window himself. But in a speech broadcast to the American people, he vowed to get to the bottom of the matter, saying, "There will be no whitewash at the White House." However, a year later, he was blackguarded when the Supreme Court ordered him to hand over tape recordings of 64 White House conversations. He was so stupid, he tape recorded himself in a conspiracy against the law. 3 days later, the House Judiciary Committee, once they'd played the tapes, recommended that Nixon be impeached and removed from office. On August the 9th, Nixon became the first ever president of the United States to resign, and by doing so avoided impeachment. His successor, Gerald Ford, who famously couldn't chew gum and walk in a straight line at the same time, issued the obvious, ubiquitous, unconditional pardon for any offences that Nixon might have committed as president. That certainly was a momentous 7 days. That certainly was the week that was. Now, Stephen is in Stornoway, wants to talk to me about China. Go ahead, Stephen.
Hello, George. Just before I get started, I would like to know what your Xi Jinping payroll number is, because I think from what I was hearing earlier on, you sound as a de facto member of the Communist Party.
Well, let's deal with those points first, Stephen, before you get into your stride. I am not now, nor have I ever been, a member of the Communist Party, or a communist of any kind. Not a Marxist, not a Leninist, not a Maoist, not a Trotskyist, not a Stalinist. I have never been a communist. I have zero relations with China. So not only am I not on their payroll, I have not actually been in China for at least 20 years, maybe 25. I have zero relations with China. So now that we've set that straight, and minus any slander that you've got in your mind, let's hear what you've got to say.
I'm asking you to justify your comments on the Uyghur-Chinese situation on Urumqi. I have lived in China for 10 years, and because there is no blood running through the streets of Urumqi, George, and I mean, I don't know, to put it in a local context, you want the blood running down the Law of Dundee before you will accept the ethnic and cultural.
Well, I do need to know who's been killed in this genocide. When, where, and how. The onus is, hold on, shut up for a minute. The onus is not on me, because I'm saying I have no evidence of any genocide. You allege genocide, so give me your evidence.
Well, let's put genocide into context, George. How much blood do you need rolling around? We're talking about
Is this your evidence for the genocide? Is your evidence for the genocide that there is no blood?
Or language genocide.
Okay. Justify your claim that there is a genocide against the Uyghurs in China. Justify it. Go ahead. The floor is yours. The world is your oyster. Go ahead.
Yes. Well, George, I have walked around the streets of Urumqi many times. I see the oppression that's going on in the Chinese government. If you are not from Han Chinese ethnicity, if you are from a Turk or Kazakhstan or Turkmenistan ethnicity in Urumqi, you are given a QR code, and for you turning around saying that unless you actually can put blood in the post that there is no genocide going on.
That was your best shot, I'm presuming. So we have now reached the stage where the definition of genocide is not that people are being killed, because you've acknowledged that there are no people being killed, not that there's blood in the streets, because you've acknowledged that there is no blood in the streets. What you're saying is that Turkmenistan ethnicity is a cause for discrimination in the Xinjiang province. If you are a Uyghur Muslim, you're discriminated against. So let me explain to you just how wrong you are. But we're no longer talking about genocide because you already conceded there is no genocide. Not only are Uyghur people not discriminated against, they are discriminated for. First of all, they are, under Chinese law, permitted to have 3 children, whilst Han Chinese couples are only allowed to have 2 children. Now, you may take a view on the one-child policy, two-child policy, and it may be hostile to it, but actually Uyghurs are allowed to have more children than any other in the Han community, in the majority Chinese community. Therefore, their population is not falling, but rising. That's a strange kind of genocide also. Secondly, the economic investment by the central government in Beijing in ethnic minorities, including other Muslim minorities, is enormous. It is completely disproportionately greater for the Uyghur population than for the Han Chinese population. Thirdly, there are more mosques in the Xinjiang province for the Uyghurs in one province than there are mosques in the entirety of the United States of America. Not only is Islam not criminalized in China, the Islamic Ummah or people are growing like topsy. Mosques are opening every day. That is a very strange kind of genocide. The fact that you in Stornoway wanted to come on here and insist on genocide with no dead people, genocide with no blood, but on the basis of what you say is discrimination against Uyghurs, is the opposite of the truth. I'll let you back in 1 minute after I've put this point to you. China is at war not with Muslims, not with Uyghurs. China is at war with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And we all should be at war with ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Not fighting them on London Bridge, but helping them in China. That's what you're doing, Stephen. Which payroll are you on?
In a minute on that, George.
The floor is yours. Don't waste it.
Well, I'll put it this way, George. I mean, you know, I don't think China fundamentally are fighting ISIS at all. China want their own ethnic and cultural identity.
I've just explained to you the extent to which that... But no, look, I've just explained to you that that's the opposite of the truth. Uyghurs have more children than any other group in China. Uyghurs have more public investment in their province than any other province in China. Mosques are multiplying in their province. So what you're saying is just untrue.
No, George, I have to say, you're teaching someone. I think your head is lost in the midst of time up in the Highlands. Maybe it's your return to Scotland that's maybe had that.
I've got nothing to do with the Highlands. It's you that's in the Highlands. It's your head that's lost in the mist in the islands.
Well, George,
Is this the best you've got, Stephen? Because I was promised that you had a strong case to make, and
George,
frankly,
I have a very strong case.
It's pathetic. It's pathetic. My head's in the Highland mist. I'm talking to you facts.
I think your head
I'm giving you
still
facts.
at the top of the monument in Dundee. And I tell you, George, you're telling me this, George. I have walked through the streets of Urumqi. I have been in China for 10 years. I have friends in China that I speak to on a weekly basis.
Then give me some facts.
What facts do you want, George?
I want facts that sustain your charge that there's a genocide against the Uyghurs in China. That's all.
There is a cultural genocide, George. You're wanting facts and blood and mass genocidal graves.
Well, I'm glad
That's the pre-propagation, George.
Stephen, I'm glad we have agreed that there is no genocide against Uyghurs in China. There's what you call a cultural genocide. What kind of cultural genocide encourages the population growth of the people that are being culturally genocided? What kind of cultural genocide has more mosques than in any other part of the world except Saudi Arabia? More mosques per head of the Muslim population than any place in the world outside of Saudi Arabia. How is that cultural genocide?
You're aware, if you are of Turkish or Turkmenistan origins walking through the streets of Urumqi, how would you like it if you were struck with a QR code, George, based on your ethnicity?
No, but that's untrue. But that's untrue.
Human rights are absolute disgrace.
That is untrue. What is true is that China is fighting the East Turkmenistan Islamic Fighting Group, the clue being in the name. The East Turkmenistan Islamic Fighting Group is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda, although many of them have broken away to join ISIS. Now, you in Stornoway don't have to worry about Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but the people in China do, and that's why they're fighting of them. Be gone. Now, apparently there's a 1-minute break that I should have taken, but I don't need it. Let me tell you about instead the second poll. Who is telling the truth about Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat refurb? For international viewers and listeners, Boris Johnson is the Prime Minister of Britain, at least at the time of this recording, and he has a flat in Downing Street. There is a major brouhaha about money that he spent to refurb it. Tony Blair refurbed it. There wasn't, as I recall, so much of a brouhaha about that. The man who's alleging it is the man, Dominic Cummings, that the entire British media and much of the political class told us just a year ago was an inveterate liar. He was such a liar that we couldn't even believe him on the issue of the coronavirus that he claimed to have. But now he is the oracle. Who's telling the truth about Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat refurb? A, Boris Johnson. B, Dominic Cummings. C, neither. That vote is now open. Now, listen. I took a trip last week to the beautiful town of Hawick in the Scottish borders. So well did it go that the journalist who was with us from a major national newspaper has not yet been able to get his piece on the events published. Because not only did I not meet anyone who was against me, I didn't meet anyone who was not voting for me. And the atmosphere somehow became almost a party, particularly outside a baguette shop owned by my next guest, who turns out not only to be a world-class impersonator of everyone from Donald Trump right across the British political spectrum, but doubles as an Elvis impersonator at the weekends. His name is Robert Hayes. He's from Hawick in Scotland. He is a turn, and he's going to tell us all about it, how we can see him, because we're short of time now. Robert, welcome to the show. I'm not sure which persona you're in this evening. Let me test it. Speak to me and tell me.
I'm in a little bit of Frank Spencer mode, Judge. I've been very nervous all day. But I'm actually from Jedburgh. That's where I'm from. I live in Jedburgh.
What about Donald Trump? Give me a couple of lines of Donald Trump.
Well, what I was doing, I was cashing some money. I heard your voice. I couldn't believe it. And the bank was shut. I said it was open. So I thought, it's fake news. Is this George or fake news? So we stopped and we chatted. And we had a good talk. You're a good guy. And I did think that you should have deserved to be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Well, now there
Maybe we could have been friends.
Your Cork accent began to creep in there, but it was a good turn. Tell us how Elvis arrived in Jedburgh and in the High Street in Hawick. How did you get into the Elvis business?
It was either becoming an Elvis impersonator or joining the British Army, which I joined the Territorial Army to go to Afghanistan, or the First Iraq War. And I think I chose wisely to buy my Elvis costumes, George.
Is there a market in the borders for an Elvis impersonator?
There's a market in the borders for truthers, honest men, decent people, and unity, George, which is why we spoke. That's what's needed in the borders. Well, that's awfully kind
of you to say. Now, we can't, for copyright reasons, play any Elvis music, even by you, on the show. But how do people find the terrific Elvis that you are in your alter ego? What do we look up?
Well, I'm on Facebook as Robbie Hayes.
Robbie
I'm also on
Hayes.
YouTube as Robbie Elvis. Robbie West is my stage name, so people can look me up.
And they can book you for weddings, bar mitzvahs, and so on?
You know, they can book me for whatever they want, George, as long as they're paying the money, sir.
Well, I've actually checked out your stage show. It is absolutely fantastic. I've seen a few Elvis impersonators in my time. Even Elvis himself in the Vegas years was impersonating Elvis Presley. In 1964, at the age of 10, I joined the official Elvis Presley fan club of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. There was a metal badge, red and silver, real metal and long. I was very proud of it. I don't know where it is now. What did Elvis mean to you, Robert?
I think Elvis Presley saved my life, George.
Oh, really? Tell us.
Oh, yes. I basically was, I would say, abandoned as a 3-year-old child with some siblings, and Elvis Presley music took me through horrific childhood. A lot of years as an alcoholic. Met my wife about 27, 28 years ago, and she changed everything. And today we own a couple of businesses. We own our house. We're married now, and I couldn't ask for anything else.
That's a very beautiful story, Robert, and I'm sorry that we don't have more time to explore it. But we have given your wee business a boost, the baguette business and the Elvis impersonation business. Robert Hayes.
And don't forget about the Jed baguettes as well in Jedburgh, in the Scottish borders, and Hoyk baguettes in Hoyk.
They're very good. The baguettes are first class, I can tell you. Robert Hayes, impressionist, singer, songwriter, and the producer of the best baguettes in the Scottish border. I've got a break for the news with Jamie Lowe.
The mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free.
Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Radio Sputnik News.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson paid for renovations to his Downing Street flat, quote, from his own pocket, according to one of his ministers. International Trade Secretary Liz Truss said, quote, everything has been fully declared in line with the rules. But she did not answer repeated questions on whether a Tory party donor initially provided the money to him. It comes after the PM's former chief advisor, Dominic Cummings, claimed Johnson had a, quote, possibly illegal plan for donors to pay for the refurbishment. The Labour Party said questions remained as details over how the work was paid for had yet to be made public. The government is supposed to publish the list of ministers' interests twice a year, but the last one, showing money donated to them, was released in July 2020. Johnson lives in a flat above 11 Downing Street with his fiancée Carrie Simmons. In March, Downing Street dismissed speculation suggesting that refurbishments on the flat last year would be paid for by Tory donors through a charity set up for this purpose, amid reports that the cost had spiralled out of control. But on Friday, Cummings launched a blistering attack on his former boss via his blog, claiming that he advised the PM the renovation plans were, quote, unethical, foolish, possibly illegal, and almost certainly broke the rules on proper disclosure of political donations if conducted in the way he intended. Truss condemned the allegations as tittle-tattle. Britain is to send ventilators to India as the country faces an oxygen crisis amid a record surge in COVID cases. The first plane load is expected to leave today. 8 further loads are expected to be sent in the next few days. The surge in cases has been accompanied by severe shortages of medical oxygen in some areas, with hospitals warning they could run out within hours. For the 4th day in a row, India has set an unwelcome world record for new coronavirus infections, with 349,691 more cases in the 24 hours to Sunday morning, and another 2,767 lives lost. Most hospitals are full and many of them are refusing new admissions owing to the uncertainty over oxygen supply. The capital, Delhi, has been reporting more than 24,000 cases daily in the past few days. The hospitals are completely overrun and healthcare workers are said to be exhausted. An Indonesian Navy submarine that sank off the coast of Bali on Wednesday has been found split into 3 pieces on the seabed, officials say. All of the vessel's 53 crew have been confirmed dead. Navy officials said they had received signals from the sub's location more than 800 metres deep early today. An underwater rescue vehicle loaned by Singapore was sent down to get visual confirmation of the wreckage. The KRI Nanggala disappeared after requesting permission to drive during a torpedo drill. The reason for its sinking is not yet clear. At least 82 people have been killed in a fire at a hospital treating coronavirus patients in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq. More than 100 others were injured in the blaze, which erupted at the Ibn Khatib hospital on Saturday night. Reports say an accident caused an oxygen tank to explode, sparking the blaze. Videos on social media show firefighters scrambling to extinguish the flames as people flee the building. Movie stars are preparing for tonight's Academy Awards, the Oscars, which will take place across multiple locations worldwide. Unlike recent awards ceremonies such as the Golden Globes, BAFTAs and Emmys, the Oscars have asked nominees to attend one of the locations in person. Films including Nomadland, Minari and Ma Rainey's Black Bottom could perform strongly in some of the major categories. The world of English football is uniting behind a social media boycott in a bid to combat the sustained racist abuse received by players online. Clubs in the Premier League, English Football League, Women's Super League and Women's Championship, along with the game's governing bodies and organisations such as Kick It Out, will turn off their Facebook and Twitter and Instagram accounts from April the 30th until May the 1st. In a joint statement, the group said the boycott hoped to, quote, emphasise that social media companies must do more to eradicate online hate. The joint statement also referred to an open letter signed by English Football in February, which urged social media companies to filter, block and quickly take down offensive posts while improving the verification process of accounts. And finally, the pandemic may be raging. Quarantine rules are changing by the day and there's still an uncertainty over when and where we can go on holiday. But one thing remains constant: the houses in Italy on sale for €1 or 87 pence if you're a Brit. It's the turn of another Sicilian town, Castiglione di Sicilia, to offer houses for less than the price of a coffee. On the slopes of Mount Etna near chic Taormina and the beaches of Scilly's east coast, the town is selling roughly 900 abandoned homes. Most are located in the oldest parts of the town, around half are ruined and will be given away at a symbolic price of just €1. The rest are in better condition and will be sold off cheaply, starting from €4,000. Mayor Antonio Camada has undertaken an ambitious project to breathe new life into his village, where the population has shrunk from 14,000 in the early 1900s to barely 3,000 today. Unlike other towns operating similar schemes, which have put together a job lot of houses for €1, Castiglione di Sicilia is pricing the properties according to their condition. If there's a lot of interest for the same property, an auction will be held. Buyers must complete renovations within 3 years. Unlike most other schemes, however, there is no deposit payable to guarantee doing the works. Instead, they are requiring owners to take out an insurance policy from a bank worth €4,000. Local taxes are low in Sicily compared to the rest of Italy, and buyers can also take advantage of the Italian government's super bonus scheme that dishes out tax credits of 110% for renovations which make houses more environmentally friendly. Many former residents of the town migrated to Australia and South America in search of a brighter future. Their descendants never returned, causing the family homes to fall into oblivion. And that's the latest here on Sputnik News. I'm Jamie Lowe.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway. Only on Sputnik Radio.
The doctor will see you now if you've got a call for Dr. Ranjeet Brar, or me, but he's the expert on the coronavirus, on the vaccine, on the marches and the tumult, and of course, including the catastrophe that is unfolding in India. Here's the numbers. 02077 982 255 if you're in the UK. If you're in the US, 001 757 744 4480. Dr. Ranjeet Brar is an NHS physician and a surgeon, and more importantly for us on this show, he is the Moats medic. Dr. Brar, welcome back to the show. I touched with you a couple of weeks ago, and then we again discussed it last week. Since when the trouble that we both, or the fear that we both had about what was happening in India with the coronavirus has suddenly become a major international story. How do you see the situation in India?
Hi, George. Good to be back with you. No question. Things in India are looking pretty serious, George. I mean, the superficial coverage probably tells a pretty good story. There are lots of coverage from hospitals in Bombay, in Calcutta, in Delhi, in other big cities of the major hospitals, saying literally they're running out of oxygen due to the pressure of beds. And that's a story that we're seeing across the country. Both central, north, and particularly the south of India experience a really massive wave, so that we've seen in the last 10 days more than 200,000 test-confirmed cases every day, coming up to 1/3 per day over the last few days, so that in the week since we last spoke, there have been a further 2 million cases in India alone. Wow. And that's one of now the big hotspots, along with Europe, and still South America, that's driving worldwide the pandemic, such that actually now, despite the fact that in Britain we're coming, really towards the end of our current problems with COVID, but worldwide we're seeing the largest number of cases, with close to 1 million, more than 900,000 cases per day worldwide, George.
Now, staying with India for a minute, what is the reason for this exponential increase in the number of cases? Is it a new variant? Is it the inability of the Indian state central apparatus to come to grips with this thing? What is it?
It's a bit of both, but overwhelmingly the latter, George. So there have been new variants identified in India as many other places. Overwhelmingly, the major variant is the same variant we have in the UK, but they have identified other variants. So a dual variant, and the E484Q and the L452R, the other two particular variants. So essentially changes in the spike protein area of COVID, but they don't think that's fundamentally driving it. It may mean that it's slightly more infectious. There are initial reports that the patients are slightly younger and more hypoxic, so requiring more oxygen in this wave. But that just may simply be the reflection of the greater numbers at this stage. It's hard to tell. What's clear is, that in terms of countries well equipped to deal with coronavirus, India would be a long way down the list, and for a number of reasons. Its healthcare system overwhelmingly is resource-starved. They've got a very low ratio of doctors and beds to the population. A lot of their care is delivered privately, but even the private hospital is also running out of oxygen. And of course, we've seen that throughout the pandemic in Britain and elsewhere, those communities that are hit hardest are those which are most socially deprived. And India has still, and I've checked the statistic because it was questioned by someone I was discussing with, 2/3 of the world's poorest population, despite it being a massive country with 1.4 billion population, despite it being an advancing economy. Until this last year, it kind of had an annual rate of economic expansion of 7 or 8%. Stalled recently, but there's unquestionably other things as well. So Modi himself is extremely close to the US. He's currently electioneering and holding huge election rallies throughout the country, despite the known increase in COVID cases. So that political, putting his political prospects first is a characteristic of his government, which is very right-wing and communalist, plays the Hindu and Muslim population off against each other, and is extremely discriminatory towards the Muslim population. Not forgetting, of course, that the Muslim population in India runs to close to 300 million people, making it one of the largest countries, Muslim countries in the world, despite it being thought of as a Hindu country. And in addition to that, of course, they've had the Kumbh Mela, which was just a couple of weeks ago, where 1 million to 1.5 million religious sadhus, kind of holy men who wander the streets of India. People who've been to India will be familiar with them, meet up annually. They've had that meeting as well. But, really there was a failure to get to grips with this from the outset, and we don't really know the full extent because, of course, testing is relatively limited, and vaccination is relatively limited, and healthcare and in general social census type data is limited in India and has never caught up. There was, for example, the Citizen Registration Act a little while ago, which was a discriminatory law trying to essentially deprive a certain proportion of the Muslim population of India of citizenship rights. And it came to light that actually huge numbers of people couldn't adequately prove their place of birth, that they were citizens of India despite having been born and raised. And that was like tens of millions of people within India. So you can imagine how difficult it is to get accurate health data for 1.4 billion people when there are those levels of deprivation and people who just won't figure on official data, George.
Whatever one's view of the government of India, it must be incumbent upon the rest of the world to do what they can to come to India's side now, mustn't it?
I think that's right. And, even Boris Johnson has said he would stand by India. USA have said that they would be first to supply aid to India. And, of course, India is very close in the international scene now. To especially US and secondarily the UK. They have a fairly right-wing government, and they've been militating, really at behest of the US, to be more and more hostile towards China, which is a great shame. It would be most obvious, seeing as they share a border, seeing as they share a similar-sized population, that they share a great deal of history, actually, for India to appeal to China. China, actually, through their foreign minister, have said that they are standing ready. The Wang Wenban, the foreign minister of India, have said they stand ready to assist India in every way. They could happily supply oxygen. They've offered vaccines, they've offered equipment, and they've offered medical personnel. But whether India will take it up under the leadership of Modi is questionable, which again will be a tragedy if they don't for the population of India. And exactly how much equipment the US and Britain can supply is again questionable when you're talking about a population of the size of India's.
Now, moving on to here, there was a mammoth demonstration yesterday. I mean, the police said it was 5,000 to 10,000, but the pictures that I saw belied that figure and rendered it absurd. It was, of course, a coalition of interests, not all of them anti-vaxxers, not all of them anti-passports, vaccination passports, not all of them COVID deniers. Although all three of those things were obviously present in the protest. It turned ugly. Several police officers were injured and hospitalized. How did you evaluate the protests in London yesterday?
George, I think increasingly we've seen throughout the pandemic there's a large section of our population who realise that they have been very poorly served by the government. There is a large number of people who are not anti-vax, but who feel, especially now, that it's time to come out of the pandemic precautions, giving our very low rates. If you look at in the UK, we've had in the last week 157 deaths ascribed to COVID, and our cases have remained absolutely flat, and hospitalizations less than 2%. So effectively, with the level of vaccination we've had, you can make a quite legitimate case for saying it's time to end the social restrictions, and they are gradually being wound down. But this is about other legislation which has been introduced on the back of the coronavirus situation, pandemic, emergency legislation, including the crime sentencing and courts bill in particular. So there's, like you say, a range of things which are being demonstrated against, but in particular the kind of more draconian and anti-protest legislation, I think is causing a lot of anger amongst significant sections of the population. So my feeling is we're going to set to see increasing levels of social discontent, particularly, to be honest, as furlough comes to an end and we see just the level of unemployment that we're left with. Unemployment figures are very hard to make head or tail of. They're so massaged that they fit into that aphorism that there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, and unemployment statistics are certainly a bit like that. But looking at the economically inactive section of the population, the people who are of employment age but are not working, and that of course covers students, and that covers people, some who are very wealthy, but the majority will be really unemployed working class people. Going into the pandemic, that was probably close to 1/4 of the working age population, and coming out it may be as high as 1/3. So we're looking at a very large number of people who are seeing record levels of social deprivation, perhaps 5 million people who are facing homelessness and destitution, at least 1 million of our children who literally don't have food on their tables in a regular way. They're food insecure, they're relatively malnourished or starving, essentially, in this, the sixth richest country on earth. I think there are going to be huge levels of political and social unrest. And to me, a lot of the legislation we're seeing on the statute book is aimed not at the COVID pandemic or dealing with the COVID pandemic, but dealing with this increasing economic inequality that we're going to see as an ongoing phenomenon, given the global economic crisis which is unfolding and impacting our country as well, George.
Let's take some questions, Doctor, if you will. Norma, the legend, is in Bristol with a question for Dr. Brar. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, Dr. Brar and George.
Hi.
My youngest son, he's 56 years old, he's not very interested in being vaccinated, and that's obviously his decision, but he seems concerned at the effectiveness of the vaccine and doesn't seem worried if he doesn't get it, but relying on his own immunity. Now, I do have to say, he's not one of those who were in Hyde Park yesterday. I think some of them were very selfish, and there was such a problem and terrible scenes in India that I found some of the demonstrations quite disturbing. But my question is, will it matter if my son didn't get the jab? Because I'm not happy about it, but he's too big for me to tell him.
Good question, Norma, but he's definitely too big for you to tell him.
Yeah,
Dr. Ranjeet, go ahead.
Hi, Norma. Thanks for your question. And yeah, it's a very different situation, of course, they're facing in India now. In India, they've got that vaccine inequality problem, so they've got kind of 8% of the population vaccinated. And here we've got more than 50% of the population and the vast majority of the elderly and vulnerable. So those who don't put themselves in the elderly category, 50, you can argue, but actually would have been offered the vaccine. And I don't know his medical background, but assuming he was totally well and fit, he might have a reasonable case for saying he's probably be okay. But it's it's hard to predict on an individual level who will be the people who have the bad effects. So there certainly have been people of that age, of your son's age rather, who have had the worst effects of COVID. So for me, at his age, age alone would be a factor that said his risk benefit to me is clearly in favor of having the vaccine. Having said that, I'm of the opinion that now that we've vaccinated the vast majority of the most vulnerable, it should be an individual choice. The trouble is people are very skewed by their level of trust of the government, their level of trust in big pharma. So they have some quite legitimate concerns. Equally, the vaccine has been developed very quickly, but it's been given now to hundreds of millions, 600 million people worldwide. Many millions, 33 million people in Britain, and despite some concerns, actually they proved overwhelmingly safe and highly effective compared to some of the ill effects and the long effects of COVID. To me, the choice is very clear. Certainly, if you're over 30, the choice is abundantly clear to me that you should have the vaccine. But it's an individual choice, and it needs discussion, ideally with a healthcare professional or someone who has information, who is trusted. and that's harder and harder to get. We're seeing an increasing backlog. It's really hard to access medical services, even for myself, my family. I can find it's hard for them to see the GP, hard for them to have that discussion, which will be really helpful. But perhaps if he has an appointment, if he attends it and raises his concerns at that point, there are lots of people from the NHS who have a lot of information about the vaccine, and they can have a sensible discussion with him.
Norma, last word to you.
Well, I hope for the good, really. I've just got a feeling that he's just going to go along his way, and I have to just leave it like that and see what happens, really.
Okay.
But thanks for your answer.
Thank you. God bless you, Norma. Let's go to Dale in Surrey. Dale.
Oh, hi there. Yeah. First of all, I just want to say to Dr. Brar, thanks for his service and information that he gives every week. So I think I speak on behalf of George and other viewers to say we really do appreciate it.
Thanks.
And I hope you can come on every week. No worries. What I want to talk about is something you've kind of already covered, but something to add as well, which you may or may not know, which is that Xiaomi, which makes smartphones in China, actually donated 1,000 oxygen concentrators to India. You won't find that, of course, on BBC News or Western news outlets, but you will if you look on CGTN or other Chinese news outlets. And a point that you made, that you're not sure if Modi is going to accept help from China. Unfortunately, the Times of India have stated that they want to look elsewhere for oxygen and help, such as Singapore and other countries. And I want to know if you think it's completely politically driven, if the US is putting pressure on India to not accept help from China. It just seems bizarre that when you really need oxygen and people are dying outside the hospital, that you would be picky with who wants to provide help to you.
Dr. Brar?
Dale, I think it's a totally a valid point that you raise. It's madness, really. There was a time when the Indian people and the Chinese people were extremely close. India was very historically close to the Soviet Union, Russia. It was very close to China. There was a time when students on the streets of Delhi, when my father was young, had a slogan, Hindi Chini bye bye, that the Indian people and the Chinese people were brothers, that their future destiny, that the closer the nations could be, the stronger they would both be. That seems so obvious, particularly when both were colonial countries or semi-colonial countries. We were liberated at the same time. We wanted to build a strong and independent economy together. But, lots of things have happened since then. So the split between the Chinese and the Russians meant that India sided increasingly with the Russians, and then later fell out of that orbit and has fallen really into the orbit of the United States. And are militating increasingly. Obviously, they had a border war in the 60s. That border dispute itself between India and China is a legacy of British colonialism and Nehru in himself. But I don't want to go over that entire history, but there's very good accounts of it. India-China war by General Call is perfectly good. Overwhelmingly, the fault for that dispute was on the side of India, though I'm Indian by origin. I can say that, and it's very sad to see. It's really entirely politically motivated, much as you, for example, saw the EU, despite being short of vaccines, would not take the vaccine from Russia purely for business and geostrategic influence reasons. And I'm afraid that India is being very much drawn into the camp of enmity with China, which goes against the interests of the broad mass of the Indian people as it does the broad mass of the Chinese people. And right now, when they're in crisis and help is being offered without any strings, really, there's no reason whatsoever not to accept it. So it gives me great sadness. But this is where we are with, I'm afraid, Modi's leadership and the current global alliances as they stand. But I hope it's great to hear that Xiaomi then have given more aid to China than the British government so far. It shows you what China could provide if it was openly accepted in the spirit in which it's given.
Thanks, Dale. Let's go to North Carolina and hear from Mark. Mark in North Carolina, welcome.
Hey, how you doing there, George? Doctor?
Good, sir.
Listen, I have to, I'm really fed up with this whole thing, with this whole COVID stuff. It seems to me like it's one big scam. I don't know what it really is. I think it's some kind of now listen to me. There was a conference in Oklahoma recently, actually over a week ago. 5,000 people got together. It was a Health and Freedom conference. in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and nobody was wearing masks. I wish I wanted to go, but my car wasn't in good enough shape to make it, and I don't fly because with the TSA, I don't like to get felt up, let alone have to wear a mask while I'm flying. So I wanted to drive. But anyway, 5,000 people attended. Nobody got sick. No social distancing. No masks. Recently in Texas, they opened baseball season, full capacity at the stadium. Very few people wearing masks. As far as I know, nobody getting sick. Okay? I don't know what COVID really is. I do not trust Big Pharma. I don't trust the vaccines. I know how I've been fighting this, or at least preventing anything. In the beginning, by the way, I was scared too. Okay? But then I started listening to people. I don't know if you know who he is, Dr. Shiva. I can't pronounce his last name, but he's not really a physician. He's a other kind of doctor, but he knows a lot about nutrition. And he was saying how the immune system works, the kind of foods you eat, and those are the kind of foods basically I was eating anyway before. And I start feeling a little better. I don't wear a mask unless I absolutely have to go into a store and make you wear a mask. Other than that, forget it. I took no precautions other than eating right, exercising, lots of sunshine, fresh air, and I haven't gotten the virus. Okay,
there's a million people got it in India in 3 days, and I don't think they're scamming us. But Mark's point is a viewpoint that is widely shared, as we've discussed many times, Doctor.
It is and it isn't, George. I think there are fewer and fewer people who really hold that COVID is not real and is a total scam, because it's hard, as you pointed out, to imagine a scenario where every country, regardless of its political alignments, even enemy countries, all essentially agree that COVID is a real disease, a real phenomenon. Any medical doctor will tell you so. So, and in the United States, your country, almost 33 million people have had that disease. There have been almost 586,000 deaths. Rates are actually increasing again in the United States. But equally, why would so many people just meekly accept treatment for a disease when they didn't need it? Why would people turn up on the streets of India, all suffering without oxygen suddenly? So there are too many phenomena to explain without COVID being real. So COVID is real. I hope no one from your conference becomes unwell. 5,000 people. I hope they all remain well. But equally, we know that that the vaccination rates are much higher now. They're 42%. So they're more likely. Less likely to get COVID. If they do get COVID, and I hope they don't, but then there would be a 2 or 3 week incubation period. Then we know it's a very variable disease that affects those who are least healthy and oldest. So, you sound like you're very healthy and are eating a healthy diet, and that's extremely sensible. Getting plenty of vitamin D, that's extremely sensible. All of those things will help your immune system, but that, I'm afraid, doesn't change the situation. I think in our country we're moving out of the pandemic essentially due to the vaccination. Apart from that, we handled it very poorly, and in your country also it was handled extremely poorly, leading to a huge number of deaths and all the inconvenience we've seen over that period of time. There are, of course, real underlying political issues, economic issues that are going on, record levels of unemployment, perhaps as many as 70 million people suddenly almost overnight unemployed in the United States. That's an economic problem of capitalism and not COVID. And so, there are people who are trying to mask all things that are going on under the world under the label of COVID as a distraction. That's wrong as well. However, COVID is very real and is causing problems and disruption, real health problems, and exacerbating the economic problems worldwide. So, I'd have to disagree with you. I hope you all stay well, but the chances are, someone may have got COVID, but equally, we hope they'll survive. That's the nature of the disease. But equally, many, many people in your country now are getting treatment, which is why hopefully you will also be able to move beyond it and back to the normal world where we'll all have normal problems to grapple with.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dr. Ranjeet Brar. As always, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Who's telling the truth about Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat refurb? Boris Johnson, 23%. Dominic Cummings, 32%. Neither of them, 45%. You can vote until the end of the show on my Twitter feed. Let me take a 60-second break, and then we're going live to Minneapolis for a reaction to the Derek Chauvin trial verdict. Stay tuned.
Radio Sputnik.
We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
From the makers of Track and Trace comes the Boris Johnson sat-nav.
Right, next right. No, left. I mean left.
What?
Yes, no, this left. Oh, crikey, you've missed it, bugger.
Oh, bloody Tories.
Or have you? Turn round. Or, in fact, don't turn around. Carry on, yes. You have arrived at your destination.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
The mother of all talk shows. Join our faculty of legends, contributors, and callers. Everyone is welcome.
You'll have to forgive me. I haven't had any dinner. And my good wife just brought me in a sandwich. But she forgot to take it away. Can we go now to Edinburgh and hear from Malcolm? Go ahead, Malcolm.
George, thanks for taking my call. Just a quick one. I was wondering if you could answer me a couple of questions. I'll summarise it very briefly. Nicola Sturgeon came out today admitting that there would probably have to be a hard border between England and Scotland. I saw one report that could cost Scotland up to 28 billion or something like 15% of the GDP. And then she wants, on top of that, free-flowing everything between, so everything's la-di-da. And then she wants to take less the English subsidies that Scotland currently get. So my first question is, that sounds like nonsense to me. And my second question is...
I suspect that it does to more or less everybody, Malcolm. And you would have thought that it kills the SNP election campaign dead. But that's not the case, as we both know.
Well, that's an interesting point. One of my points on that was going to be, for me, that's an obvious death knell for her and her campaign, because anybody with half a brain cell would realise that if there's just been a professor that's come out of a reputable university saying that actually it would be more costly than Brexit for Scotland, and it doesn't work, and she's just admitted that there will be a hard border. That was a fatal blow for her.
One of our top MSPs, Emma Harper, she said she wanted a border because it would create jobs for border guards.
I did laugh at that, I have to admit.
You laugh or you cry, yeah?
Well, you have to laugh because we're Scottish and we try to laugh if we can. But I get to my second point, George, and, you know, if anybody with an IQ above room temperature sees that a hard border would be bad, 70% of our trade is with England, so costs will go up and everything will go up. So, and this is a serious question for you, George, and maybe you can answer it, maybe you don't want to answer it, that's your prerogative. But if it's bad news for Scotland, and she's prepared to throw Scotland under the bus with idiotic things like this, does she have a personality disorder? Is she so her hatred of England and her own agenda, is she mental?
Well,
that's a Scottish word, by the way.
Yeah. Einstein described nationalism as an infantile disorder, as the measles of humanity. And I think that in a developed country like ours, a wealthy democracy like ours, nationalism and separatism is a kind of a mental disorder, but it seems to have grown for reasons, some of them easy to understand, but it seems to have grown to the extent to which it produces derangement in the land. I gave right at the top of the show. Someone in their own name. This was not, by the way, one of these accounts that was anonymous. Someone in their own name threatened to shoot me in the head. Lord Forsyth in the head. Douglas Ross in the head. And it stayed there on Twitter for days before it was brought to my attention. The First Minister's plea, advice, or warning, take your pick, that English visitors coming into Scotland should not go into our pubs, cafes, and restaurants. Well, first of all, the hospitality industry has already been devastated. The only people that are going to come and spend money in Scotland are English visitors, but you're not allowed to go into the restaurants or the bars. And if your wife is English and you are Scottish, you're supposed to leave her outside. That's mental, isn't it, Malcolm?
It's absolutely crazy, George. And the thing about it is, and what you said, I mean, and the death threats you received and other people received, an absolute disgrace. I mean, I live in a part of Edinburgh, unfortunately. If I was to put up an anti-SNP poster in my window, it would get caved in. You know, somebody would throw a brick through the window. And I'm so hopeful, and I'm so hanging on to the fact that people are seeing through her nonsense and the hatred she's stirring for the English. I'm a proud British person, and she's managed to take the national flag and the nationalist cause to take 20-30% of the population that unfortunately hate the Conservatives and Boris Johnson, and she's hijacked it. And I honestly think she's semi-crazy, because Scottish independence would be a disaster. We'd make Greece look like Monaco.
Well, Moldova is the current model that I have in mind for a separate Scotland, but I don't think we're going to have a separate Scotland, Malcolm. The current opinion polls put the support for separatism down in the 30%, not even the 45% that they got in the once-in-a-generation referendum just a couple of years ago, 5-6 years ago. So I think the number of people who would support such tearing apart of the country is falling. But the problem is, in the elections, given our electoral system, and given that the people who oppose separatism cannot find unity amongst themselves, cannot stand down in favour of each other, cannot unite their supporters, even once behind an anti-SNP vote, they're probably still going to be the biggest party in Holyrood after the election. Malcolm, thanks for a highly intelligent call. The next call, equally so. Michael in Minneapolis has covered the Derek Chauvin trial for us, the murderer, we can now say, of George Floyd, and he's back with a summing up of it right now, I hope. Michael.
Thanks for having me on the show, George. It was quite a scene this week. I was out at the courthouse for the rally that was happening both before and after the verdict, and it was unlike anything I've really ever seen. I mean, there were thousands of supporters. There were press from all over the world. I mean, I can't even tell you how many languages I heard from different press people. And, you know, there was a lot of tension. There were National Guard troops everywhere overseeing us with their AK-47s. There were helicopters. There were drones. It was a crazy scene. And I can tell you, when they announced the verdict and they announced that he was not only guilty of, of the manslaughter, which we thought he would be convicted of, but not just third-degree murder, but also second-degree murder, the relief was unbelievable. The outpouring emotion, people were sobbing, people were cheering. It was quite a sight, George.
Has the sentence been handed down yet?
No, so the sentence will be handed down on June 16th. That'll be the date they do that. So they get a little bit of a break between now and then to sort of let things cool off. And at that point, he will be sentenced for the most egregious charge, which was second-degree murder. And that holds a sentence of 12 and a half to 40 years. However, Derek Chauvin, because he does not have a previous criminal history, the most he will probably be able to be sentenced to would be 30 years. And that would be if the judge is able to find that they were if they rule that there were aggravating factors in the killing. So that it was sort of, wanton disregard for human life and sort of how egregious that was. So on the low end, he's going to serve at least 12 and a half, should be sentenced to at least 12 and a half years, but up to 30, depending on, what they decide.
And has Minneapolis now calmed?
Yeah, George, I can tell you, it was like the tension was it was an immediate release. You could feel it. I mean, there were, people were celebrating in the streets for hours afterwards. Where I was down by the courthouse, traffic was at a total standstill, people honking and cheering and people, they marched into the night, but it was entirely peaceful. Everyone was really relieved and happy about the verdict, and there have been essentially no issues. Now, I will say the barricades are still up, the razor wire is still up, the National Guard is still here. So I speak for, I think, most Minneapolis residents when I say I'm ready to go back to normal and get rid of all that stuff.
Indeed.
So
well, look, Michael, you've been really helpful to us. Don't be a stranger now that the trial is over. But a big thanks on behalf of the whole audience, I think, for bringing us the colour, if you like, the atmosphere, the verisimilitude of events around the trial in Minneapolis. Much obliged to you, my friend. Edward is in Roscommon in Ireland, I think.
Hello, George.
Yes, Edward, how wonderful to hear your accent. Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard you about an hour ago. You were talking about the time President Kennedy got shot.
Yes.
And you were saying that you were sorry for him, which is fair enough. But I also heard you say I'm a big follower of yours. I often heard you say how you were a friend also of Fidel Castro as well. Well, the fact is that President Kennedy spent a lot of his time in his presidency trying to murder Castro, so I just don't understand your...
not a lot of his time,
your position
Edward,
on both of them, you know?
Yeah, not a lot of his time, because they murdered him only 3 years into his presidential term. The principal reason that the people who murdered him was precisely because he would not invade Cuba. They considered him a traitor in selling out the Bay of Pigs infiltrators, not supporting them. They believed there was a confluence of factors involved in the murder of Kennedy, but one of the principal ones was that he was, quote unquote, soft on Cuba. So there's not necessarily a contradiction, but Edward, I'm of Irish background, you are Irish. You will know that in surmounting all of history's discrimination and bigotry against Roman Catholics in the United States, the victory of Jack Kennedy as a Catholic man from a well-known Catholic family was regarded by my family, and I think probably yours, as being of significance. And we had in our home a picture of the Pope and a picture of Jack Kennedy.
Yeah, that's right. But it's just Fidel Castro was a hero to his people as well, you know what I mean? And I don't think we should let JFK off the hook that easily, George. And as well as that, George, I don't believe that the CIA murdered Kennedy. still, I just think that it was Oswald. You know, maybe I'm wrong, but I'd never seen anything that would make me contradict that. So.
Well, I've seen a million things that make me
I've seen
contradict
JFK.
it.
It was a fantastic movie, but I just didn't agree with the whole premise of it. You know.
I believe that Jack Kennedy was killed by a security guard on duty in his own cavalcade. Some would have you believe that it was in error, but I don't believe so. I think that Oswald was a patsy. I think that the mob who hated both Kennedys because of the crackdown on organized crime, the Cuban emigres who regarded Kennedy as a traitor to the anti-Castro cause, people who felt that he was not up to the potential nuclear conflagration with the Soviet Union, that he would look for diplomatic solutions, as indeed he did over the Cuban Missile Crisis. I think this confluence of interest came together and killed Jack Kennedy. And I commend to you Bob Dylan's epic Murder Most Foul. You'll enjoy it, Edward, if enjoy.
I'm sure.
If enjoy is the right word. It'll make you shed a tear. It certainly did me.
Well, I just wanted to clear up. I thought there was a bit of a contradiction in your position. You know.
Well, we've all got little contradictions in our positions, Edward.
Yeah. You know what I found out yesterday, George, and that's made me sick? I was always a big fan of Robert De Niro's, and you know what he's been doing? He's been doing benefit gigs for the Israeli army. I was appalled when I heard that.
Well, you can enjoy someone's art without agreeing with their politics. After all, who knows?
But what kind of mentality
Michelangelo's
would put on a show for the
were?
Israeli army? I just don't get it. You know, it's outrageous.
I separate these matters. I think that Robert De Niro is a fantastic actor, and I will always think so, irrespective of what his political views.
It's just that it's just that it spoiled him for me anyway. But anyway, that's it.
Well, nice to talk to you,
for taking my call, George.
No, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and hats off to all the good people.
I'm a huge fan. I always watch you on RT as well. So
God bless you. Thanks so much indeed for that. Nyla in Ealing wants to talk about the Hyde Park protest. Go ahead, Nyla. Hello? Oh, right. Who's telling the truth about Boris Johnson's refurb in his flat? 24% now say Boris. Dominic Cummings has gone down to 31, but 45% of you think they're both liars. I think we've got Nyla now. I heard her voice there. Nyla?
Hi.
Hi. Yes, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Okay. I heard that you wanted to hear from people who were in the park yesterday.
Yeah, a pleasure. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. So I was at the park. It was, a carnival atmosphere. People were having fun. And then all of a sudden, 2 lines of police appeared and charged into the crowd. And, they ended up kettling themselves because they were outnumbered.
How many? Tell me first of all, how many you think were there?
How many police or how many?
No, how many?
People?
How many people? How many protesters?
I would say not even a lot at that point. Maybe about 70 max.
70,000.
No, at the protest.
Yeah, 70
Sorry,
people. 70 people. Yeah, that was in the park at the row, at the Rumble. How many do you think were on the protest march?
I don't know, because even when I stopped at 2 points for significant periods of time, they were still going past. There was figures initially of about 200,000, and that moved up to 500,000, and people are predicting even up to 1 million. But there's no way I could say. We have no aerial footage of it.
No, oddly, we don't. The police said there was 5,000 to 10,000, and that was absurd. That was absurd, but then police estimates of protest marches are historically not that accurate.
Of course.
But what was the prevailing set of demands, if you could sum them up?
I mean, it mostly seemed to be against the lockdown, but there was, I think there was the anti-vaccine passports people. There was a lot of people there for that reason. People opposed to being forced or being pressured into getting the vaccine. There was even, I saw stuff against the police powers bill. So,
it was eclectic. Was it left wing, right wing, no wing? What was the feeling? You're a veteran leftist, if you don't mind me saying. Did you feel at home?
It was actually a really mixed bunch, and I felt like there was a lot, amongst the right there. But, people come together on this issue, and, there didn't seem to be any kind of animosity between the people that were on, like, the sides of the political spectrum, between left and right. It was just really joyful.
So tell me then, back to the park. The police charged. Why did they charge?
Well, they did this last time as well. So I think they were given orders. They were giving people orders to leave after a particular point, after a particular time, 6:30 maybe. But then, people were still singing, dancing. I took some videos of people just like playing music, etc., right before they charged. And because they charged and because people were being peaceful, that made people really angry. So there was a lot of pushing back. The police were outnumbered. I don't know who gave the orders for them to be, it was dangerous for them. But, there was a lot of people, thankfully, in the protest who were stopping the violence from both sides.
Okay, Nyla, an objective description. I know you to be an objective person. Thank you very much indeed for bringing that to us. The poll, more than 1,000 of you, who's telling the truth about Boris Johnson's Downing Street flat refurb? Boris Johnson, 24%. Dominic Cummings, 31%. But neither of them telling the truth, 45. Shows you the benefit of the split vote. Now, just for the avoidance of doubt, I believe that Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings are both liars. I wouldn't choose between these two cheeks of the same backside. But I do call out hypocrisy. It's my job. The entire British media hounded Dominic Cummings, hounded him, doorstepped his elderly parents, retraced his steps from London to the northeast of England. They expended millions of words to tell us that Dominic Cummings was a liar. But when Dominic Cummings makes allegations against Boris Johnson, suddenly he's a cross between St. Francis of Assisi and the Oracle. He must be telling the truth because he's Dominic Cummings. But last year, he must be lying because he's Dominic Cummings. I have no torch to bear for Boris Johnson or his wife or Dominic Cummings or anybody at 10 Downing Street. But here's what I think is happening here. The people that gave everything, including money and their political life's blood, to stop Brexit, haven't gone away. They are irreconcilable. And they dream of the day when at least they can get revenge on those that brought Brexit about. If not, that they can somehow, by alchemy, get us back into the European Union. And that is one of the reasons why the ugly nationalism of the SNP gets such an easy ride in the London media, amongst liberals and self-defined progressives, who would hate something called the BNP, but love something called the SNP. Go figure. Nationalism is foul when it is enunciated by Tommy Robinson with his flag on the streets of England, but lovable, cuddly when it is enunciated on the streets of Scotland. Thanks for watching. Good night.